Lucky's diner sat a bit too far from the road, a mistake made by the original land surveyor. This turned into a lucky break for the new owner, who had a smart lawyer. The lawyer managed to secure the land behind the diner for his client. This gave the diner room to grow and even create a parking lot for trucks. With this added space, the lawyer helped expand the restaurant's plans to welcome more customers, making it a popular spot for a warm meal and great coffee. 40 years later, it remained a beloved place for tired travelers and local people in Rochester, New York. One of those locals sat on his usual stool at the counter. He had been coming to this diner for about 7 years, though he didn't visit every day due to his work that took him all over. He often wondered why this seat was always open when he came for breakfast or dinner, but he was grateful for it. "Good morning, Hal." He looked up and smiled at Eve, the gray-haired waitress, who held a coffee pot in one hand and a mug in the other. "Morning, Eve," he replied. She placed the mug in front of him and poured, watching his face. After years of experience, she no longer needed to focus on the cup to know when to stop. "Are you okay, hon?" Hal let out a small snort as he looked up again. Eve had a knack for noticing things. He managed a nod, and she accepted it, understanding he wasn't ready to chat. "Usual?" she asked. He nodded again, and she went off to prepare his meal. Eve had an amazing memory and never needed to write down the orders of her regular customers. A sudden sharp pain shot through him but faded quickly as old memories brushed against him and then slipped away. He sipped his coffee, holding the mug tightly as if it were a lifeline. He needed to clear his mind, a tricky place to be, so he focused on the sounds and movements around him. This was a skill he had learned to stay alert in difficult times. Now it helped him stay grounded. The sounds filled the spacious diner, the clink of cutlery on plates, the thud of mugs on tables, the hum of conversations, some quiet and some loud. Everything felt ordinary, and he found comfort in that. But there was one sound that stood out, almost hidden among the noise. It was a faint, high-pitched tapping. It was different from the clanging of forks and spoons. It seemed to tremble. It was the sound of worry. That didn't belong here, and he wished he could ignore it. Not today of all days. He made the mistake of looking toward the noise and noticed where it came from. He quickly looked away, scolding himself, but it was too late. She was sitting 2 stools to his left, and he took a moment to notice her. She was tall, maybe as tall as he was. She had a slim build with long arms and legs, fingers wrapped around her coffee mug. Her hands were shaking, and the sound came from several silver rings she wore. She was blonde, and what he first thought was an unusual snake was actually a long braid of her hair. Wow, that was a lot of hair. Her eyes were large and soft brown, framed by long lashes. When they glanced his way, he saw pain and fear in them. Her makeup was messed up from crying, and there were faint bruises from being struck. Her slightly pointed teeth hadn't been fixed by braces. Her lips looked soft, although the top one was healing, likely from a hard hit. Her nose was a bit larger than average, but matched her big eyes and that bite. While she wasn't classically beautiful, her face had real character, which made her interesting in its own way. She was definitely interesting, but her body language made it obvious she was in trouble. She seemed like someone who would attract every dangerous person around, and with those bruises, it looked like she already had. He wondered if she was running away. She seemed to be in her early 30s, almost a decade younger than him, so he thought about whether this was a new situation for her or if she had always faced tough times. She wore snug light blue jeans with rips on her thighs and frayed cuffs over worn-out black shoes. The smudged pink jacket barely covered her waist and was worn open. From the side, he noticed it might not close at all. He caught a male voice behind him talking about her. He wasn't the only one seeing her situation. But unlike them, he wasn't looking to take advantage. Eve came with his food, and he felt relieved for the break in focus. He smiled at her, noticing the question in her knowing gaze. He shook his head, thanked her, and began to eat. Eve walked over to the woman. "You sure you don't want anything to eat?" "No, thank you. Just more coffee, please." His fork froze halfway to his plate as her deep voice startled him. He hadn't expected that. He wasn't sure what made it sound so rough, but it was surprising since he had thought she would sound softer. There was still fear and weariness in her voice that tugged at him, so he pushed it away and finished his breakfast. When he was done, Eve was there to take his plate and pour him more coffee. Will I see you again tomorrow? She asked. No, not for about a week. Going for a long drive, Hal said. Another business trip? They work you too hard, she replied, concerned. Not business. I'm headed west to L.A. It's personal, he said, feeling a bit awkward. You can't drive all that way, Eve exclaimed. You should fly from Buffalo. No, I'll drive. I need the time to think. Hal tried to push the troubling thoughts aside. Could I get a ride? Just to Erie? I have a sister in Pittsburgh. I can take a bus from there, she asked, her voice shaky but sweet. He looked into her soft brown eyes, which were a bit watery from holding back tears. She turned on her stool, and he noticed how she was trying to catch his attention. Today was not the right day for him to get involved. He wasn't in a good place to take care of anyone else. He lowered his gaze to his coffee. No. I can take you to Erie, said a voice from behind Hal. He recognized the voice as belonging to a truck driver who had been making rude comments about the woman earlier. Hal knew she shouldn't accept the offer. He felt her gaze along with Eve's and kept his hands around his mug, trying to focus. Sure. Thanks, she replied. He felt a rush of anger wash over him. This wasn't his duty. She wasn't his responsibility. He didn't seek out trouble. His eyes closed as pain shot through him once more. I just have to use the ladies' room. Sure. My truck is parked right behind the restaurant. It's the one with the trailer. You can't miss it. Hal let their chatter fade as he took deep breaths. He sipped his coffee, trying to focus on the outside world again. Suddenly, he caught whispers nearby. Pete, where are you? Good. Meet me at the rest stop just east of Buffalo. I've got someone for us. Yeah, just like last time. The voice faded as the trucker walked away, probably getting ready for something he didn't like. He knew it was a mistake. From the woman's tears, it was clear this was not her first problem. His mug shattered in his hands, the coffee spilling onto the counter. Eve rushed over to clean up the mess, gathering the pieces of the mug while watching him with worry. Sorry about that. Put it on my bill, he sighed. Eve nodded and started to walk away. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her arm. You need to stop her from leaving with him. Eve raised her eyebrows but stayed quiet. He breathed deeply. He called his friend. He took another breath to calm himself. They have a plan to hurt her at the next stop. Eve gasped and brought her hand to her mouth. She looked him in the eye. Hal, she needs to be safe on her way to Erie. He blinked at her, confused. Yes, that's why you have to tell her not to. You need to take her, Eve insisted firmly, leaving no room for disagreement. He opened his mouth to argue, but she gave him that look mothers use on stubborn kids. She was really good at it, but she didn't know who he had become. She had no idea of the danger. Eve hurried away, and Hal saw her catch the woman just before she left the building. The woman was carrying only a small pink backpack. Eve leaned in close and spoke softly. Hal noticed the woman flinch and then begin to cry. Eve put an arm around her and led her back toward Hal. His stomach tightened as they got closer. When they stood before him, he looked into the woman's teary eyes. Erie? He asked, and she nodded weakly. Another victim. Okay, I'll get you there, he said roughly. Eve smiled at him as she let go of the woman. This is Sam. Sam, this is Hal. They exchanged brief nods. He tossed some cash on the counter and looked at the waitress. When I get back from L.A., I want a slice of blueberry pie. She patted his arm. Sure thing, dear. With a quick glance at Sam, he headed for the door and held it for her. She followed closely behind, as if she were worried he might leave without her. Outside, he took her to his rental car. Since he was traveling across the country, he treated himself to a nicer car. It was just a little bigger and fancier than usual, with GPS to help navigate. He opened the door for her, feeling a little awkward for falling back into his old habits. She looked surprised, but quickly got inside. He shut the door and walked around to his side. He glanced back at the diner and saw Eve watching him with a small smile. He frowned in frustration before getting in. He used his phone to find the Erie bus station's address and entered it into the GPS. Then they were on their way, merging onto the westbound highway. They drove in silence, each lost in thought. Eventually, they passed the rest area where the truck driver had planned his gathering. Hal heard Sam start to cry again, but tried to ignore it. They went around Buffalo, but he pulled off the highway at the edge of town, aware of Sam's unease. He drove into the parking lot of a McDonald's and turned off the engine. She looked at him with some worry. "You've been sitting with your knees pressed together for a while now. It's okay to stop if you need to. Just let me know. Please use the restroom inside." She nodded, feeling relieved but still a bit anxious. "Your stomach has been making noise since we left the diner. I'm going to get you something to eat. What do you want?" She tried to say she was fine, but her stomach growled. "An Egg McMuffin?" she suggested with a shy smile. He nodded and got out of the car. Sam hurried out too. He locked the car and then held the door open for her. She smiled at his kindness and hurried inside. He ordered 3 breakfast sandwiches for her and some bottled water for the car. Hal noticed a teenage girl rushing towards the door, carrying a backpack that looked very familiar. It had the same tear on the strap as Sam's bag. This was something he felt he could handle. He took a quick step forward and grabbed the loop of the backpack, pulling it from her grip. "Hey, give that back!" she shouted at him, clearly upset. He stood quiet, watching her. "I said give me my bag, jerk!" She raised her voice, trying to frighten him. "What's happening here?" a deep voice asked from behind Hal. "This guy is stealing my bag!" the girl yelled, clearly frustrated that her strategy wasn't working. The manager stepped in between Hal and the girl. "Is that true? Did you take her bag?" "No," Hal replied. "He's lying! Give me my bag!" she screamed. Just then, Sam ran out of the back of the restaurant looking worried. Hal turned to the manager. "That bag belongs to her. This girl took it while she was in the restroom." "It's not true!" the girl shouted as she broke free from the manager's grasp and darted outside. The manager tried to catch her, but she was too fast. She quickly disappeared around the corner of the building. Sam's lip was trembling again as Hal handed her the backpack. He grabbed his food from the table and walked outside with Sam close behind. This time he let her open her own door, and she climbed in quickly. "Did everything go okay?" he asked, and she nodded. "How did she get the backpack?" "It was hanging on the hook inside the stall. I was sitting down when she came over and took it. She also messed with the door lock, and I had trouble opening it." She looked at him with big, sad eyes. "Thank you for getting it back." He nodded. "Lesson learned. Now eat your breakfast." He handed her the bag after taking out the water bottles. He noticed there were no napkins. "There are napkins in the glove box." "Please try not to drop any food," she said, and he simply nodded. Hal drove them back onto the highway, joining the busy traffic on 90, heading west along Lake Erie. Sam took the chance to eat quickly. For her 3rd sandwich, she slowed down and began to enjoy it, leaning back in her seat and looking more at ease. "Oh my gosh, thank you. I haven't eaten in days," she said with relief. Hal felt a bit better too. Helping someone else felt good. She was definitely distracting him, which he thought might be a good thing. "You're welcome." He glanced at her and noticed she was looking at him. He raised an eyebrow and focused back on the road. "What? You aren't what I expected." He looked at her again and saw she was studying him. "What made you expect anything? We just met." He felt a twinge of guilt because he had done the same when he first saw her, even though she hadn't proven him wrong yet. She seemed taken aback by his question. "People. We often judge each other at first sight. It's just how people are," she explained. "What did you think?" he asked, intrigued despite himself. She paused, then started to speak. "Your clothes look like they've been worn for a while and they don't really fit well. You haven't shaved in a few days. I thought maybe you were one of those people who blend into the background, the kind who don't get noticed and just let things happen to them. But now you seem comfortable with yourself, especially back at the restaurant. I wish I had that confidence." He frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you," she said quickly. He shook his head. "It's all right, I'm not offended." He paused. "I've had a rough time recently. I'm not the best company right now. That's part of why I'm driving across the country. It gives me time to think." She watched him quietly for a moment. "Is that why you turned down the offer?" she asked softly. He gave a low grunt. "Yes. I'm sorry for prying, but I'm thankful you helped me stay away from those bad people." He nodded carefully. Sam didn't realize how close she was to danger now. They continued to drive in silence. The view was plain since the highway was designed for speed, not for scenery. "How long have you been on the run?" The question slipped out before he could stop himself. Maybe the feeling of danger made him lose his manners for a moment. She stiffened, glancing at him and then away. "Why do you think that? Bruises on your face, a hurt lip, marks on your wrist, not eating well, your actions in the diner?" Hal finally realized he should stop talking as he saw her becoming upset. "It's all right. I'm not judging you, I'm just—" He looked at her, feeling a mix of emotions. "I'm not sure," he admitted softly. They traveled quietly for a bit, then she spoke up again. "It's been 2 days. Frank hit me. I couldn't stay any longer, so I ran away when he went to the club." "The club?" Hal asked gently. "The Kitty Club. It's a place he manages. I worked there. Is Frank coming to find you?" Her wide eyes looked at him, revealing her fear. "Probably. Yes. Does he think he owns you, or is it about money?" Hal asked, keeping his voice calm, though he felt anger rising inside. "Both," she replied, her voice shaky but stronger now. "He said I wasn't young enough to work where I was and needed to change my looks." She pointed to her chest. "He paid for them." "Did he say how much it cost?" Hal questioned, starting to understand the situation better. She seemed trapped. "He wouldn't tell me," she said with a slight quiver in her voice. "Does Frank know where your sister lives?" Hal wondered, knowing Sam's choices might put her sister in danger. Sam shook her head. "I haven't talked to Delilah in 15 years. I know she got married, moved to Pittsburgh, and has 2 kids. My brother Jimmy gave me her address a few years ago. He came looking for me. He died in a motorcycle accident that summer." Hal felt a troubling thought cross his mind, but kept it to himself. He needed to focus on the now. He was just helping Sam get to Erie, where she would catch a bus to see her sister. He couldn't let himself think about her past any more than necessary. She had her journey, and he had his own issues to handle. "Why are you going to L.A.? She asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. He took a moment, breathing slowly to calm his reaction. After he relaxed, he saw her watching him nervously, which made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to add to her worries. "Sorry." "You don't have to tell me," she said quickly. "No, it's just something personal." They drove on in silence. Hal felt like he'd disappointed her trust. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked suddenly, surprising him again. Her concern for him hit him hard. He almost laughed but stopped himself, feeling guilty for even thinking about it. It showed how twisted things were inside him. He could lie and say everything was fine, but he couldn't do that. So he told her the truth. "I don't know. I'll just have to wait and see. That's why I'm taking a week to get there. I need the time." He took another look at her and noticed that some of the lost trust had come back, thanks to his honest answer. "You know what I did. What do you do?" Her questions felt innocent, but they cut right through him. He decided to give a simple answer. "I'm an inventory control manager for an office supply company." He glanced over and she smiled. It was the first time he'd seen that, and her wide grin made him smile back. Still, he wondered why she was smiling. "What?" She shook her head, her smile growing bigger. It pulled at something inside him. "Seriously, what?" Hal asked, grinning. She seemed to think for a moment. "Your job just doesn't seem like you." His eyebrows raised in surprise. "Why?" She looked at him closely, as if trying to see more. "I don't know. It seems like you should be doing something bigger." "Bigger?" He chuckled. "I don't know. More important, less boring," she replied, shaking her head. Hal smiled to himself. "Don't knock boring. I like it." Her laugh was sweet, her voice warm. There was a hint of relief in it. "I don't see it," she said, still looking at him with curiosity. "Maybe you should be a firefighter or a police officer, or in the military?" He locked eyes with her. "Military?" She looked away, shy. "I'm not sure what kind. I'm not great at explaining." "I stand by my point. Not everyone can handle exciting jobs. A bit of calm is nice." She nodded but looked a little disappointed. He caught her frowning slightly. "What's wrong? I see a ring. Are you married?" Her question hit hard, and he fought to hide his reaction. He nodded. "What does she do?" He took a breath and let it out slowly. "Dental hygienist." "Ugh, Looking into people's mouths all day, she said. He nodded, wishing she would change the topic. Unaware of his discomfort, she pressed on. Why isn't she on this trip with you? The pain was building inside him. He fought to keep his composure. She's busy, he said at last. She noticed the tension in his face. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. He quickly looked at her and saw that she understood. That was almost harder to bear than her not knowing. I didn't mean to pry. Please don't! Hal struggled to regain control of his breathing. He needed to get away from this woman before she realized how much danger she was in. He saw a road sign that showed an exit for Erie, Pennsylvania. It felt like a way out, just 3 more miles and he would leave the highway. He could take her to the bus station and then he would finally be alone. That felt safer. As they neared the exit, he glanced over and noticed the sadness on her face. Fear was creeping back in. You don't have money for a bus ticket, do you? Her big, wide eyes looked at him. Sam's bottom lip quivered as she shook her head. Oh, no. You should call your sister before you show up at her place? Her expression grew heavier, but she nodded. He took the exit and followed the GPS through the city, heading north toward the lake. The Greyhound bus station was located by the piers. Hal kept an eye on Sam, noticing how anxious she became as they got closer to the station. Finally, they arrived at the parking lot next to the buses. He turned off the car and glanced over at Sam. She was doing her best to stay calm, and he admired that. He opened the door, and after a moment, she joined him. I'll pay for your ticket, but you need to call your sister first, he said firmly as he locked the car. She looked at him and nodded. They walked together across the lot to the bus station and went inside. It was mostly empty, and they didn't see any payphones, but they found a bench near the ticket booth and sat down. Do you have a cell? He asked. But her lost look told him everything he needed to know. Okay, use mine. I'll check on the bus, he said, pulling out his phone and handing it to her. She took out a small red notebook from her backpack and opened it to find her sister's number. Hal walked to the ticket counter to speak with the agent. Hi, I need 1 ticket to Pittsburgh. The agent glanced at his screen and typed something. The only bus to Pittsburgh will arrive in 30 minutes. It costs $36. Hal turned back to Sam, who was on the phone. Hello, Delilah, it's me, Sam, Samantha, your sister. There was a long pause. Please don't say that. Another pause followed. EU was hoping to come see you. Today. Sam started to sniffle. Please, Deli, I'm not. Please, oh no. She looked down at the phone, and then her shoulders began to shake as tears streamed down her face. Hal watched her in silence, feeling a deep sadness. He understood there would be no happy reunion with her sister, a result of past choices. He walked back to Sam, sat on the edge of the bench, gently took his phone back, and rubbed her back to comfort her. A memory flickered in his mind. Lisa, crying into her pillow, him sitting on the edge of the bed comforting his wife. He couldn't remember why he was feeling sad, but he thought it was his fault. It was hard for him to tell if that thought was right. Now, he wondered if those tears had anything to do with what was happening now. His mind was busy, looking at every small action and word for answers. Finally, a bus came to the station announcing the departure to Pittsburgh. They stayed on the bench, not moving. When the bus left, he noticed the woman resting her head on his leg as he thought back through memories. He looked down and saw he was gently brushing her hair. She seemed more relaxed now. What was he going to do next? He had plans to go to the West Coast, and she didn't belong in that situation. He didn't want her to get hurt because of him. At the same time, he couldn't bring himself to push her away. It felt like she had been pushed enough lately. He might have his problems, but he didn't want to be mean. He needed to keep heading west. He couldn't choose for her, but he had to make a decision for himself. He looked down at her and saw her eyes were closed. What are you going to do now? He managed to ask, his voice tight. She shook her head and leaned against his leg, trembling slightly. He turned his head to look out the window, not wanting to see her face. He could just walk away. He had kept his promise to Eve, safe and sound. Then he spotted a trailer with Queen's pork sausages written on it. It was attached to an old red truck he recognized. He had seen it earlier, leaving a place called Pinky's, and now it was right across the street. That meant he couldn't just leave Sam behind. They were probably watching them. Sam, we need to go. Right now, he said urgently. She looked at him, puzzled. But then she noticed the serious look in his eyes. "Come on." He helped her stand, handed her backpack to her, and urged her to start moving. "What's happening? Where are we going?" Her voice trembled with fear. "The person from Pinky's has been following us. We're heading to my car." His instincts were heightened, and he noticed movement in the parking lot around them. They were closing in. He had to stay alert. They were parked a row back and had to get through the first row of cars. He knew it would be a risky moment as they walked out from between the vehicles. He carefully changed their path, guiding them between a parked box truck and a Jeep. When they got to the rear of the Jeep, he gently nudged Sam into a narrow space. "Keep moving," he urged quietly. She stepped forward, glancing back, but he had dropped out of view. She took a few more shaky steps when suddenly a hand grabbed her wrist tightly, pulling her forward. Fear made her legs weaken. She screamed as she fell against the side of the Jeep. Frightened, she grabbed onto the metal bar to stop the attacker from getting to her. Behind her, she heard loud noises and quick movements. Something hit the ground, followed by more heavy sounds. Keeping her eyes shut tight, she flinched at the loud sounds nearby. Then she heard a calm voice next to her. "Sam, it's okay. We need to go now. Come on." Gentle hands helped her stand up and grab her bag. She looked down in fear at the two men lying on the ground. "Quickly now." Sam held onto Hal's arm as he led her to the door of the passenger side. When the door shut with her inside, she felt much safer. She turned to look back at the two attackers on the ground. Hal sat behind the wheel and spoke into his phone. "Thanks." He hung up and put a stun gun in the space between the seats. He noticed her shocked expression. "I took this from the trucker. They were going to use it to take you away." He started the car and drove out of the lot slowly. He tapped the GPS a few times, then they were on the road. He didn't say anything until they were back on the highway. He glanced at Sam and saw she was still watching him. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes, but what did you do?" He looked away, his face stiff. "I know how to defend myself." Turning back to her, he asked, "So, going to your sister's is not an option?" She looked like she might cry again, but she nodded. "Do you have another plan?" he asked. She shook her head. "No other siblings, cousins, an aunt?" Her expression fell, and he could see she was upset. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "I'm heading to L.A. Do you have somewhere else you need to be?" She shook her head, her eyes sad. He felt frustrated. He didn't think it was safe for her to be with him in L.A. He wasn't sure what would happen, and he needed time to think. She started to cry again. "Why are you crying?" he asked, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm scared. I don't want to trouble you, but I have nowhere to go, no money, no family. My ex-boyfriend wants to hurt me, and those men tried to take me in broad daylight." She was shaking. "I'm scared, but I feel safe with you, but you don't want me here." Her tears turned into sobs, and Hal felt trapped. He had felt in control after dealing with the two men, but her crying brought back feelings of anger and frustration. He had to put a stop to it. "You can stay with me until we figure things out," he said firmly. "Please stop crying." The tears slowed as she looked at him with hope. To avoid seeing that, he focused on the road ahead. Soon, the crying stopped, and they drove through the countryside. "Where are we going tonight?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I reserved a room in a motel in Columbus, Ohio. I'll book another room when we get there." Hal looked over and noticed her worried look. "What's wrong?" "I don't want to be a burden." He let out a deep breath. "What do you mean?" "I only brought the clothes I was wearing." She gave him a pleading look. "I'm not ready for a week-long trip." Hal glanced at her again and took a moment to compose himself. Finally, he agreed, "All right, we can stop and get you some things for the trip." Seeing her look of distress, he added, "I have a travel budget." Her eyes sparkled a little again, but she held back her tears. "Thank you." He nodded, and they continued driving in silence. They had almost 4 hours until they reached Columbus, so they settled into the comfortable seats. After a while, Hal felt her gaze on him again. He turned slightly to look at her, and she seemed very curious. "What is it?" he asked, unsure if he wanted to hear her answer. "I didn't see it, but when you fought those two people, it was so quiet. I've never heard a fight like that before." Surprised, he raised an eyebrow. "You've heard a lot of fights?" She nodded seriously. Frank and his friends, the bouncers, they often hurt people. Sometimes when people drink too much, they bother the girls. They take those men outside and we hear it while we're getting ready. I think they do it so we can hear it's frightening. She looked down at her chipped nail polish, a look of sadness crossing her face. Sometimes they do it just for fun. They'll take someone outside and rough them up. Sometimes it's one of us, me. She shook her head, then glanced back at him. Usually fights are loud, with screams and cries and angry words. But yours was so still, and it was over quickly. I don't like to fight. Liar, whispered a dark voice in Hal's mind, but only he could hear it. He took a deep breath. Strike quickly to disable the opponent, end it fast, then walk away. He could sense the dark presence's disdain for his words. It thrived on destruction and wanted more. Inventory control manager, she said quietly, almost to herself. He chose to stay silent. It felt safer that way. Hal merged into the busy traffic of the loop highway around the western side of Columbus. They were making good time, even with a few stops for Sam. During their first stop, he waited in the car while she rushed to take care of herself. By the time she returned, she was visibly anxious. For the next stops, he decided to go inside with her and wait. This helped her feel a bit better about not being left behind. At one of their stops, he called the next motel he'd booked and got a room right next to his. Sam finally fell asleep, and he noticed how peaceful she looked. He took the exit off the highway and entered the quiet neighborhood. He spotted the motel, but remembered they had some things to do first. Dinner came first. Sam, time to wake up. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing her big brown eyes. Are we at the motel? I thought we could grab dinner first, he said, and her eyes brightened. He pointed to the GPS screen. There are many restaurants here. Which one do you want? Her eyes widened, and he realized this might be the first time she was asked to choose. She scanned the screen eagerly. They have an Olive Garden, she said excitedly. He looked at her and then the map. Is that what you want? Her smile faded a bit. You don't like it? It's good. I like it, he reassured her. Olive Garden it is. Her smile returned, even brighter this time. He found it hard to look away. He parked the car close to the entrance. As they got out, they stretched and laughed at their shared groans. After locking the car, they went inside. The hostess noticed Sam's outfit and raised an eyebrow. The tall blonde edged a little closer to Hal. He stepped forward and met the young woman's gaze. Although she seemed about to brush them off, the manager came over and noticed Hal's annoyed expression. He leaned in so Hal could whisper to him. The manager's eyes widened, and he quickly moved the hostess aside, choosing a nice table for them. He personally took Hal and Sam to a cozy table for four and seated them. Hal made sure to sit with the wall at his back and Sam on his left, keeping his view clear. Your waitress will be here soon, the manager said with a friendly smile. Once they were alone, Sam leaned in a bit closer. What did you tell him? She whispered. He shrugged. The hostess was going to make things difficult, so I mentioned I was a federal marshal, and you were in witness protection, so we needed to be seated quickly. She started to giggle, then looked at him with wide eyes. It's true. You could be a marshal. Suddenly she froze. Are you a marshal? She whispered, surprised. He smiled and shook his head. They looked over the menu and placed their orders when the busy waitress hurried over. When the food arrived, Hal found it to be okay, but he enjoyed watching Sam savor her meal even more. When she finally leaned back and rested her hands on her small belly, she looked truly relaxed. Are you full? He asked, and she nodded with a sleepy smile. Don't fall asleep now. We have to do some shopping, he urged. She made a face, then noticed two men walking toward their table. A look of worry crossed her face, and she grabbed Hal's hand, making him look to see who she was concerned about. Wow! I never thought I'd see you here. Rapunzel, what a surprise! A hefty man said as he approached. The slim man next to him just stared at Hal. The chatty man looked around. Where's Frank? Hal glanced at Sam, but she was frozen, so he answered for her. She's not with Frank anymore. The man finally looked at Hal. No way! Mr. Capello doesn't let anyone go, especially not Goldilocks. Who are you? I'm her friend. Who are you? The chunky man laughed. I run the kitty club just down the road. I know Rapunzel from her performances back when she was on stage. I don't think she wants to remember those times, Hal said firmly, interrupting the smug man, whose expression turned serious. The man looked Hal over, and then his smirk returned. You're not very friendly. Hal suppressed a laugh. The man had no clue. You could say that. Have a good evening. The chubby man nodded to himself, then nodded to his partner before turning his attention to Sam. See you later, Goldilocks. Once they were alone, the waitress hurried over and Hal paid the bill. He noticed Sam was shaking from the encounter. He needed to distract her, or he would be facing tears again. Let's go. We have some shopping to do. She stood up, and he wrapped his arm around her back to support her. Surprised, she looked at him but held onto his hand until they reached the door. He led her to his car, and then drove to the store. We can get everything we need here, he said as he got out of the car. She nodded and hurried to stand next to him, linking her arm with his. She glanced behind her. Inside, Hal grabbed a shopping cart and took her to the women's clothing section, steering her past the rack of discount t-shirts she had stopped by. Please don't take this the wrong way. This is a chance to improve your wardrobe. You don't have to stick to t-shirts. Don't worry about the price. If it looks nice on you and fits, we'll buy it. She looked at him wide-eyed. We need a week's worth of outfits. She started to pick items carefully. With each blouse she liked, she turned to Hal for approval. He nodded each time. Only once did he shake his head, but that was only because he thought it didn't look good on her. She took the selected items over to the fitting room, where he waited by their cart. When she came back with only 3 blouses, he raised an eyebrow. The others didn't fit, she explained, earning a disapproving glance from a nearby sales clerk. Let's find some more, he said simply. Sam smiled as she placed the 3 blouses in the cart. While she searched for more clothes, he found a few items for himself in the men's section. He picked up a 3-pack of black shirts and a 3-pack of black boxer shorts. He also grabbed a pair of charcoal gray running pants. Everything went into the cart. The next hour passed with Sam trying on various outfits until they had enough for at least 8 days. Along with the blouses, she found 3 dresses that made her quite happy. He encouraged her to get jeans without too many rips, but she insisted on 3 pairs of yoga pants. As they went through the clothing, she modeled several outfits for him. He noticed how fit she looked. His first impression of her had missed how long and toned her legs were. She had a slim figure, but he thought she looked good. He caught himself thinking about his ex, Lisa, and felt his mood drop. Trying to shake off the feeling, he led her to the undergarments section. He looked into her eyes. Please choose undergarments that fit well and are comfortable. The bras that provide good support tend to be expensive, she started, but stopped when he gave her a stern look. He raised a hand and rubbed his forehead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to react that way. I just have a lot on my mind. Don't worry about the cost. If it supports you, it's worth it. She let out a surprised snort, then moved away with a cheerful smile. He wondered where those words had come from. Flirting wasn't really his style. She soon returned with a pile of bras and panties, which went into the cart. She noticed he seemed distracted, but didn't ask about it. As they walked past the shoe section, he stopped. You need some sandals for the dresses and definitely new running shoes. Her eyes brightened, and she went off to find sandals. He noticed a nice pair of women's running shoes, white with pink accents and comfortable soles. Although a bit expensive, they seemed much nicer than the old worn shoes she was wearing. He also picked up a 6-pack of ankle socks. These went into his cart, too. He spotted her sitting on a bench, looking down at her feet. Her expression was sad. What's wrong? I can't wear sandals with nails like these, she replied. He quickly pulled up a map on his phone and found a nail salon nearby. Let's finish up. You can get your nails done at a place in the next shopping area. Her eyes widened in surprise as she looked at him, clearly not expecting his offer. Why are you being so nice to me? He thought about that for a while. Helping Sam made him feel better, too. I guess it helps me as well. I can't explain it right now. She slipped on her worn sneakers and stood up. She added 2 pairs of sandals to the cart and looked at him. Thank you. He nodded, and they started walking again. They stopped in front of the luggage section, and she looked at him, puzzled. Did you think I would let you carry your clothes in plastic bags? You need a suitcase. Pick one. A medium size works well. The hard-shell ones are pretty good. Her eyes found a bright, pink, hard-shell suitcase nearby. She walked over and gently touched it. Looking back at him, she said, "I've never had a suitcase before." Her smile faded as she looked down at it. "I've never traveled anywhere that needed one. This is the farthest I've been from home." Leaving the cart behind, Hal walked over and pulled the suitcase out for a closer look. It met his approval, so he carried it back to the cart and tucked it underneath. He also grabbed a pink makeup kit for the cosmetics they would get next. "What's that?" Sam asked as he placed the small bag in the cart. "Makeup kit. We're going there next." He pushed the cart, and she hurried to keep up. It took some time, but he made sure she got moisturizer, deodorant, her favorite cosmetics, some brushes and combs, a toothbrush, and toothpaste. He bought her large bottles of shampoo and conditioner for her long hair. By the time they reached the checkout, the cart was quite full. Sam worried about how much it would cost, and Hal had enough. He didn't want to raise his voice, so instead, he gave her a hug. He was surprised by his own action and found it amusing that she was actually an inch taller than his 5'9". He noticed her warmth and then stepped back, finding her smiling shyly. They carried their things to the car, and he opened the trunk. She noticed he had 2 black suitcases already. He placed her pink suitcase inside, opened it, and quickly loaded their purchases. There wasn't much room left when he finished. "We forgot to get you sleepwear," he said, feeling frustrated. "I don't wear clothes when I sleep," she admitted. He glanced at her and then took one of his black t-shirts and tossed it into her suitcase. He closed it afterward. "You should have something in case you need to leave quickly." She nodded in agreement. They drove to the nail salon, and he followed her inside. He found a spot to sit and wait while a kind woman brought Sam over to the pedicure area first. Seeing that she was being taken care of, Hal leaned back and closed his eyes, feeling content. He took a short nap until he heard Sam and the nail technician coming back. When he opened his eyes, he saw a big smile on Sam's face. She was wearing flip-flop sandals to let her toenails dry, which were painted in her favorite hot pink color. She had her old sneakers in her hands, so he took them from her and tossed them in a nearby trash can. Sam held out her hand, and he admired the lovely polish on her nails. It was a soft pink that turned white at the tips. They were her real nails, just a bit longer than her fingertips. He told her they looked nice, and she beamed with happiness. Once again, Hal paid and gave the young woman a nice tip for making Sam so glad. They walked back to the car, and Hal drove them to the motel not far from the shopping area. Once inside, Hal registered and got the key cards for their rooms, which were next to each other on the ground floor. He parked in front of one of the rooms. "This is mine, and you have the other one," he said. She looked at him. "We don't have to be in separate rooms," she said softly. "Yes, we do." He took a deep breath. "I haven't been sleeping well lately. It's better for you to have your own space." She studied him for a moment and then nodded. He took their suitcases as she opened her room. He rolled hers over to her, and she smiled in delight as she caught the handle and wheeled it inside before closing her door. He opened his door and brought his bags in. After a moment, he walked back to her door and knocked. "Who is it?" she called. "It's Hal," he answered with a smile. She did well. She opened the door and saw him smile, and it made her smile back. "If you need anything tonight, just knock on the wall between our rooms 3 times. I sleep lightly. I want to leave tomorrow by 9 a.m., which means we need to leave the motel by 7:45 a.m. to get breakfast first. Then we'll come back, brush our teeth, load the car, and be on our way. Does that sound good?" She nodded, and he continued. "If you want to watch a movie, feel free." "No, thank you. I'm going to take a long shower and wash my hair. That's enough for tonight," she said. He smiled, noticing her long braid. "Okay, lock up and I'll see you in the morning." She smiled and closed the door. Hal heard her lock it and felt satisfied as he went into his room and locked up behind him. He changed out of his wrinkled clothes and felt a bit frustrated because he hadn't packed any extra outfits in his rush to leave home. The only clothes he had were the shirts, underwear, and running pants he had just bought. His suitcase did have his boots and socks, so he planned to switch from loafers to those in the morning. He set aside his clothes for the morning and neatly put away the dirty items. Barefoot and focused, he began his usual exercises, a mix of stretches and movements for his muscles. This routine usually helped him feel more centered, letting go of the day's stresses and organizing his thoughts for later. Yet tonight, he couldn't reach the calm he hoped for, still uneasy over Lisa's recent actions. The best he could aim for was enough relaxation to fall asleep when he finally went to bed. An hour later, he accepted he wasn't going to reach that peaceful state. Even relaxation seemed distant. His mind drifted to an incident in Erie where he'd let his anger out but had held back from going too far. That restraint left a restless energy within him, waiting for another chance to surface. He wasn't worried about the two individuals involved that day. The injuries they'd been left with were enough to end their harmful behavior. He doubted they'd be moving without discomfort anytime soon. Switching to a set of push-ups and sit-ups, he kept going until his muscles felt tired. Then he jogged in place for 20 minutes before heading to the bathroom for a shower. The hot water was soothing, allowing his mind to relax slightly. He thought about how challenging it must be for Sam to wash her long hair. For a moment, he imagined her under the shower and then quickly redirected his thoughts. A memory of his time with Lisa replaced it, how her energy had always been wild and unpredictable. She was daring and knew exactly how to push his buttons, sometimes mixing chaos with excitement. She was the most intense person he'd known. He remembered once walking in on her in an unexpected scene. The tension from that encounter lingered in his memory, shaping his sense of caution with her. In the end, he let the shower's warmth clear his mind, focusing instead on the here and now. Hal tried to shake off the intense memories clouding his mind as he scrubbed away in the shower, aiming for a sense of calm he wasn't sure he'd find. This recollection of moments with Lisa left him feeling uneasy, his mind wrestling with memories he wished he could set aside. After a deep breath, he stepped out of the shower, determined to focus on more practical matters. Suddenly, the sharp beep of a key card jarred him fully awake. Instantly alert, he moved quietly, slipping from the bed to his feet. Hidden in the shadows, he adjusted his grip on the knife he kept close. The door opened with a loud creak, and a familiar figure stumbled into the room. His feet tangled in a carefully arranged bedspread near the entrance, and he fell with a heavy thud, his weapon discharging into the floor. Another man quickly entered, but Hal was ready. He struck, catching the intruder off guard and pushing him back out the door before ducking into the next room where Sam was. The third man turned in surprise, gun aimed, but Hal moved with precision, managing to disarm the assailant and knock him back. The confrontation was brief, intense, and over as quickly as it had begun. As quiet fell over the room, Hal took a moment to breathe, listening as the sound of retreating footsteps faded down the hall. He stood amidst the aftermath, trying to regain his composure. The threat had passed for now, but his mind remained alert, knowing there could be more to come. Hal was quiet as he listened, but no one was coming. He could hear soft, frightened sounds coming from the bed. "Sam!" Hal called out, pushing the scary thoughts away. He left the person on the floor and moved carefully to the bed. "Hal?" a voice asked softly from under the sheets. "Yeah, it's me. Just stay there for a moment. I'm going to check around. You're safe." He went to the door and listened. Nothing. He stepped outside and looked at the man he had knocked out. Lifting the shirt of the man, he noticed the microphone, wires, and tape he had felt when he grabbed him earlier. The man had meant him harm, but Hal was still in control. The man was unconscious and might have a slight head injury. Hal went to his room and grabbed his phone. He called his supervisor. "Report. Need help. There was an attack. 3 are dead, 1 captured with a wire." "Understood. Give me the address, then wait." Hal shared the details, then hung up. He returned to Sam's room. He heard her quietly crying. "Sam? It's okay. It's all over." He sat on the edge of the bed. She pulled the sheets up to her chin and looked around for him. She gasped when she saw the 2 bodies on the floor. "These were the guys we met at Olive Garden, plus some others," he explained. "You killed them?" she asked softly. "They weren't friendly. The thin guy barged into my room with a gun. He tripped and accidentally shot himself. I couldn't believe it. These 2 were after you. 1 got away." He frowned when he noticed Sam still holding the blanket tightly. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in the doorway as the local police arrived. "Are you wearing the shirt I gave you?" he asked, and she shook her head. He sighed and took off his shirt to give to her. "Put this on. The police are here and they won't be easy to deal with, but it will be okay. I called for help." He looked at the door while she struggled to put on the shirt. "Police, come out with your hands up!" He sighed again. "Here we go." Sam stared at Hal in shock. His back was covered in scars. She watched him stand and walk toward the door, illuminated by the flashing lights. Then it was her turn. She felt grateful for his large shirt since she wore little underneath. She tried to move like him, but fear made it hard. She stepped into the light. Hal caught up on sleep in a holding cell at the police station. There wasn't anything else he could do. "Demon!" He opened his eyes and looked towards the door of the cell. "Demon?" "Whatever. You're getting out," the officer said. Hal stood and walked to the door, and the officer unlocked it. He followed the man into a large room filled with desks and a few officers on the night shift. He was standing there in just his black shorts with no other clothes on. The room became silent as everyone turned to look at him. At first, he felt uncomfortable with people's curiosity about his scars and burns, reminders of his painful past. But now, he chose to ignore their stares. Sam was sitting at one of the desks, talking to a woman detective. She seemed to be okay for the moment, wrapped in a blanket for warmth. Not far behind Sam was his handler, Carl Gunderman. Carl was in his 60s but looked much younger. He was a small, slim man with a thick black beard and a short haircut. His voice was deep, but he never smiled. He walked over to Hal, quickly scanning him for any new injuries. "I'm fine." "No injuries, just a near miss," Hal replied quietly. "Why?" Carl asked. Hal let out a small laugh, thinking about how Eve had pushed him to take care of Sam. "No choice," he answered. Carl raised his eyebrows, glancing at Sam. Hal nodded in response. "Why are you off the program?" Carl asked. Hal hesitated, an image of Lisa flashing in his mind. They had worked together long enough to communicate without words. Carl understood that Lisa was unpredictable in Hal's life. "I need some time, just a week," Hal said, meeting Carl's gaze. The older man finally nodded. "Can you manage without her, the trouble magnet?" Carl asked, pointing at Sam, already having a read on her. Hal looked at Sam from behind and wondered if she wanted to distance herself from him after seeing a glimpse of his past. She must have sensed his gaze or noticed the sudden quiet because she turned around and saw him standing there. Without hesitation, Sam jumped to her feet and rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. She buried her face in his neck, trembling slightly. He instinctively wrapped his arms around her too. Hal exchanged a surprised look with Carl, then shook his head, quietly answering Carl's last question. Carl frowned in resignation, held up a finger and mouthed, "1 week." Hal nodded, and Carl walked away without saying another word. "Miss Dulane, I have a few more questions," the female officer said, and Hal felt Sam grip him tighter. "Sam has finished answering questions," he said firmly. The officer wasn't pleased and raised her voice. "This is an active investigation." "Stand down, Officer Haynes," the commanding officer interrupted. The officer looked at her CO in disbelief. "Sir? Orders from above. There's no case. Destroy the paperwork." The female officer glanced at Hal, then nodded to her commander. "Yes, sir." She returned to her desk. "Thank you," Hal said. "Don't mention it. Not my choice." He handed over a big envelope with Hal's wallet, keys, and room cards. There was also a bag that held his knife. Carl had done his job well once again. "The people who barged in had access cards. Did you talk to the night clerk?" Hal asked. "He's vanished, just like the driver. Even if we found them, we still can't link them to anything," the man replied, cringing as if he tasted something sour. He looked at Hal with discomfort. "You messed up a big operation we had been working on for a year, but Officer Romano wanted me to thank you for not doing worse." The cringing returned. Hal simply nodded. "We need to return to the motel for our things. Can you give us a ride?" Hal asked. The commander nodded. "It's set up. You'll meet the driver at the precinct entrance." He walked away without another word, clearly unhappy with the situation. "Let's go," Hal said to Sam, who stepped back to look at him. "We just get to leave? I don't get it. People died. She seemed confused. He couldn't explain it to her. It would be too much for her to understand. Maybe she'd want to stay behind. Yes, we're leaving. There are no charges against us. It will likely be noted as a failed robbery resulting in the attackers' deaths, and it will be seen as self-defense on my part. If you want to stop now, I'll understand. No! Sam held onto his arm. Don't leave me here, she whispered with urgency. I don't want to be alone. He blinked at her and then nodded. All right, let's head back to the motel. They walked down the stairs to the ground level where a man was waiting with a smile. Mr. Demon, he corrected automatically. My bad. I'm here to take you back to your motel. The man seemed a bit taken by how Sam looked in her black shirt. Let's go, Hal said to pull the man's focus back to the task. They followed him to a minivan and sat in the middle seat as the driver hurried to get behind the wheel. The drive back was quick, but Sam held onto Hal's arm the whole time. She kept shaking. When the driver dropped them off, the sun was just starting to rise. Police tape was still around the area in front of their rooms, and 2 police cars were parked nearby. Hal approached the closest police car, and the officer inside glared at him. We're going in to get our bags, and then we're leaving. Will you be here until we're gone? He asked. The officer pointed to the other car. He's keeping watch over the scene. I'm here to escort you out of the city, he replied sharply. Hal nodded and walked over to the police tape. He carefully moved it aside and cleared the way to their doors, but both were damaged. Hal noticed a bullet hole in the window of Sam's room. He felt relieved to see that the bullet had stopped at the ceiling above them. It could have easily gone into one of the rooms in the building across the parking lot. Get ready for the day. Pack your things into your suitcase and then meet me by the car. We're leaving early today and we'll grab breakfast in Springfield, he said. She nodded and headed to the open door. I can't, she said, her voice shaky as she looked inside. Hal sighed and guided her inside. He encouraged her to pick some clothes and get dressed while he packed her remaining items into her suitcase. He carefully stepped around the large stain on the carpet and gathered her things from the bathroom. He brought her makeup kit back out and placed it inside the suitcase. He opened a plastic bag for her dirty clothes and added it to the suitcase before zipping it closed. He looked at Sam and blinked in surprise at how she looked. She wore his black t-shirt under a soft, light gray sweater that had a low neckline. Her dark gray pants fitted closely to her legs, and she wore new sneakers with ankle socks while waiting for him to say something. Wow, you look really nice in that outfit, he said. Her smile lit up her face, but then she became shy. He signaled for her to take her suitcase as he left the room, with her following him. When he stepped into his unit, he sighed at the sight of the uncleaned areas on the carpet and walls. Turning to her, he said, You should probably wait here. The room is not great. She nodded, and he went back inside. He carefully navigated around the mess to reach his bathroom, where he took a quick shower and dried off. He shaved, used deodorant, and organized his kit. Finally, he cleaned his knife, planning to do a more thorough job later. Stepping back into the hall, he avoided the mess again. A squeak caught his attention, and he looked up to see Sam turning to face the door. He quickly realized he was not dressed. He hurriedly put on some underwear, running pants, and his last black t-shirt. He unlocked the larger suitcase and found a pair of socks and his boots. After sealing up the luggage, he carried it to the doorway. Let's go, he said, and they stepped outside. Hal loaded their suitcases into the trunk and opened the door for Sam. She sat down and pulled her legs inside as he watched. He closed her door and walked around to his side. When he started the car, a police cruiser behind him moved back to clear the way. Hal pulled out of the spot and drove through the neighborhood streets until they reached the interstate. The police car followed them until the next exit, where it turned off and left the highway. Hal glanced at Sam, who was leaning back in her seat with her head turned toward him. Tough night, huh? He said gently. She smiled weakly at him. I had a nice shower and my hair feels very clean for the first time in a long while. The bed was cozy, and I was having a good sleep until those men came into my room. Then I was really scared. Her smile faded. I thought something terrible had happened to you and that they would take me back to Frank. He nodded, understanding how she must have felt. But that wasn't what happened, he said softly. No, I I covered my head with the blanket and jumped every time I heard a loud noise. I was so frightened." She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Then it was quiet, and you were talking to me like everything was okay. You weren't even out of breath, and it was over." He shook his head because it mattered to him. One man survived. She stared at him as they drove through the peaceful countryside. She didn't know this man, yet he had protected her from danger. He had taken her with him on a journey he had not wanted to share. He had paid for her meals and clothes, and now he had fought for her. She felt grateful but was not sure how to express it. He seemed calm, as if he was not waiting for anything from her, but she felt she owed him a lot. "Thank you for saving me," she said, tears welling in her eyes, but she held them back because he didn't need her to cry. He glanced at her and nodded slightly. The miles to Springfield quickly faded away under the wheels, and he turned off the highway to find a place for breakfast. They ate in comfortable silence, and soon they were back on the road again. "Where are we staying tonight?" she asked. "A small place called St. Charles, Missouri, just west of St. Louis. I have a hotel room booked with 2 queen beds since that was all they had. I could look for another hotel if—" "No, I think it's better if we share a room," she said hopefully. He thought about it. Would it really be safer for her to be in the same room as him? He had faced down danger to protect her, and today he felt calm. He just couldn't think about what lay ahead and the decision he would have to make. He turned back to Sam, who seemed to be waiting for his answer. "Okay, we can try that, but I should warn you. I don't sleep well and I can react strongly to surprises. You'll need to let me know before you get up to go to the bathroom. Moving around without telling me might not go well." She nodded, considering his words. "Waking me up by talking is fine, but don't come close until I am awake and responding normally," he added. "Is that a condition?" she asked, and he felt the weight of her question. How could he explain this? He couldn't. He wasn't allowed to share those details. Still, he wanted to offer her some reassurance. "Yes, She nodded and settled back in the chair, looking out the side window. He let out a sigh he didn't know he was holding. He didn't want to deceive her. Soon the endless flat land made Sam fall asleep. Hal realized she hadn't been able to rest at the precinct. Now he had time to think, but all he could think about was Sam and how nice she looked in her new outfit. He felt a tugging feeling again, one he hadn't felt for a long time. He pushed that thought away because it reminded him of his past behavior when he first met Lisa in high school. Back then, Lisa enjoyed playing games with everyone. She had a way with guys, and many of them were drawn to her, which she loved. People admired her, and also disliked her for how she could easily get attention. Hal had already gone through a tough time in the orphanage and foster homes by the time he reached Lisa's school. He was struggling socially and was heading down a bad path. Lisa saw him as someone who could join her wild behavior. They began their rebellion in a way that shocked their school. Lisa would pretend to date a popular guy, while Hal would step in and confront him. He didn't realize he was doing exactly what she intended. She pushed him more, and their actions became more reckless. By the end of their first month together, they were in a stolen school bus, racing across state lines, leaving trouble behind. At their trial, a judge with military ties gave Hal a choice: spend time in jail or join a special program to manage his energy. The program seemed better than prison, so he agreed. Lisa received traditional therapy. She managed to leave with her diploma and a scholarship to train for a practical job. 10 years later, Hal became a success story from that program. They announced he was ready for the next step. He returned to civilian life with a job in a small company in northern New York State. Even though he still went on missions around the world, he always came back, ready to heal and continue contributing to society. His success in the program continued. Before long, he no longer returned from missions hurt. Those lessons were behind him. Then came the day he saw her. Lisa was having lunch at an outdoor cafe, and a young man at the next table was trying hard to get her attention. She seemed to playfully tease him, and Hal felt himself drawn to her as well. He walked right up to her table and sat down across from her. The young man tried to protest, but Hal firmly held his little finger and calmly asked if he could do without it. Hal and Lisa spent the rest of the day focusing on each other. He pulled away from his memories, feeling a rush of emotions. Lisa always had that effect on him. He realized now that it wasn't a healthy relationship. His supervisor had mentioned this a few times. It was only Hal's strong performance in his missions that allowed him to stay with her. He knew that any sign of trouble with his duties would lead to quick actions against him. He was brought back to the present when he saw signs for Terre Haute. They would stop for lunch here, and he let Sam choose where to eat. As he exited the ramp, he called out to her, "Sam, we're stopping for lunch." "Huh? What? Lunch?" she asked, blinking sleep from her eyes. "Where are we?" "Terre Haute, Indiana. I'm just going to drive up the street to see what options we have." They drove a few blocks when Sam made a small sound indicating she found something interesting. It was an Applebee's, so he parked. She looked at him. "Are you okay with this?" He smiled and nodded. "It's fine." They got out, and he quickly scanned the area before locking the car. He walked to her side, and she took his arm as they headed toward the entrance. He wondered when this touching started, but remembered it was in the police station. He thought about pulling away, but realized he didn't really mind. Sam seemed happy, too. They went inside, and Sam beamed when the friendly hostess greeted her with a smile and led them to a table. It was a much better welcome than she had received the night before. Hal sat down, watching the door, and was surprised when Sam chose to sit next to him, but she had done the same the night before. She eagerly studied the menu while Hal quickly decided on a small salad. Truthfully, he wasn't very hungry. The waitress was also kind to Sam. Her cheeks flushed from smiling so much. "Thank you for these new clothes. They really make a difference," she said excitedly when they were alone again. "They're just clothes. You're still you. If it takes a new outfit for them to treat you well, that just shows what they are like, not you," he replied with a slight shrug. She leaned against him and squeezed his arm gently. Hal felt good, but he was also uneasy about it. "Sam, I need you to stop," he said gently. She leaned back and looked at him, her eyes wide. "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." She started to move away from the bench, but he held her hand. "No, that's not what I meant. You've been really kind, and I know things have been tough for you. I understand if you feel grateful." He took a deep breath, trying not to think about his wife, though he felt it was necessary now. Looking into her eyes, he saw her concern, and he placed his other hand over hers for reassurance. "I've been married for many years, and that means a lot to me. But recent things have shown me some hard truths." He felt a sharp pain in his chest and paused for another deep breath. "I'm not great at understanding my wife. She's better at seeing through me. I think she may have been leading me on throughout our marriage. I've realized this only a few days ago. I need to sort this out before I can make changes in my life." He sighed deeply. "I can be really bad at picking up on feelings, but with you it's different. I can see what you're feeling easily. It's a relief." Sam's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she managed a small smile. "I'm sorry about your wife. I have to say I've heard many men say their wives don't get them and that their marriages are mistakes. This is the first time I've heard the opposite, and it feels refreshing," she admitted. Hal raised an eyebrow in surprise, and she smiled shyly. "I like you too, but I won't rush you into anything. I want you to be ready." She looked down bashfully. "Can I keep holding your arm and hand? It makes me feel calm," she asked quickly. Seeing her worried expression, he nodded. She was much easier to understand than Lisa. Just then, the waitress came to take their orders. After she left, Sam glanced at Hal, surprised. "You only ordered a salad?" He chuckled softly. "These salads aren't the healthiest. If I use dressing, they might have as many calories as your chicken tenders and fries." She looked concerned. "Am I eating too much?" "No, that's not what I meant. Eat what you enjoy. You seem to take good care of yourself," Hal said, feeling awkward. A shy smile returned to Sam's face as she glanced down at his hand over hers. She noticed a scar on the back of his hand, and, curious, turned it over to see a matching one on his palm. It looked as if something had pierced his hand. She remembered seeing that his back had many scars. "How did you get all those scars?" she asked. He shook his head. "I can't talk about them. You shouldn't ask about them." She nodded but looked a bit uneasy. "I see them as lessons. I don't get them anymore." "Inventory control manager?" she inquired. He nodded. That's my regular job. We won't discuss anything else. She nodded firmly and then smiled at him. What kind of movies do you like? He glanced at her carefully. You'll laugh. Now she smiled widely. I promise I won't. What is it, musicals? He gave her a strange look. Musicals? No? He looked around to make sure they were alone. I like animation. Anything animated? Sam's eyes widened. This wasn't what she'd expected at all. What was the last one you saw? He smiled as he thought back. Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse. A really great film. So you like superhero movies? She guessed. No, not really. The movie before that was My Neighbor Totoro. When he saw her confused look, he added, It's a Japanese animation about a family that moves to the countryside and meets friendly woodland spirits. It's a sweet movie. She smiled at him. You are full of surprises. He looked at her carefully. That's good? Very good, she replied enthusiastically. Their food arrived, and Sam's joyful expression made Hal feel good. He realized she made him feel this way much more often than his wife, Lisa, ever did. Lisa only seemed happy when he was uncertain around her. While he ate his salad, he pondered this thought. When they finished, he paid and asked the waitress where the closest Walmart was. She told him about a mall just south of the highway. It didn't take long to get there, and once inside, Hal found a store to pick up more black shirts and running pants. Sam loved walking through the mall with him, so they did just that. He noticed her eyes focusing on a display of gold bangles as they passed a jewelry store. They were on sale. Feeling spontaneous, Hal guided them into the store, and Sam's eyes widened in surprise. He thought he should buy her one. It would be unfair to show them to her and not let her have one. He wondered what made him want to go in. When they left the shop, Hal felt dizzy from the persuasive sales pitch. His wallet was $400 lighter, and Sam was absolutely thrilled with 5 lovely bangles making soft sounds as they moved on her wrist. Oh my God, Hal! I've never worn anything this pretty, she exclaimed. He just nodded and got them outside and into the car. He stopped to fill the gas tank, and then it was back on the road towards St. Charles. He remembered that for this overnight stop, he had a hotel room with 2 beds. The way Sam looked at him made him feel a bit uneasy. He needed to clear things up. Sam, I don't want you to misunderstand about the bangles. He could see he had her attention now. I didn't buy these for you expecting anything in return. I'm a married man and I keep the promises I made. I don't know why I bought them except that they made you smile. And you haven't smiled enough lately. He looked over, and her big, bright eyes were glistening again as she bit her lip. Oh no, I've upset you again. She quickly shook her head. You're such a kind man. Thank you for thinking that my smile was important enough to buy this lovely gift for me. Hal nodded and turned back to the road, considering her words. It felt good enough to let go, so he moved on. The view outside was not very exciting, and soon Sam fell asleep. Later, Hal woke her up to show her the crossing of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. She was glad to see it. The hotel was located right by the highway. They drove around the area and spotted a movie theater. We have some time. Would you like to see a movie? We can grab dinner afterward, he suggested. She smiled and nodded. You choose the movie? She said. They parked and walked up to the entrance to check the movie listings. Is there anything you don't want to see? Hal asked, unsure about the film showing. I don't like horror movies. Are you okay with comedies? Sam pointed to a poster. He nodded, so he bought tickets, popcorn, and drinks. The theater was mostly empty, so they got good seats. Hal didn't find most of the movie funny, but he loved hearing Sam's cheerful laughter, which made the experience enjoyable for him. After the movie, when Sam found out he had never eaten at the nearby P.F. Chang's, she guided him there. He noticed her showing off her bangles, and the hostess complimented her on them. She lit up with happiness, and Hal thought they were a great choice. They looked nice on her wrist. Sam encouraged Hal to try different dishes from the menu, and he found most of it delicious. He didn't mention his previous trip to China, as this food was quite different. When they finished eating, they drove to the hotel and checked in with their luggage. They headed to their room, which was new for Sam, while Hal thought of it as just another hotel room. I'll take the bed closest to the door. If you need to get up, just call out. Please don't come near my bed without saying something first. I need to answer you before it feels okay," he said. Sam watched him closely and nodded. "If you want to use the bathroom first, feel free. I like to work out before bed," he added. "Really? I thought exercising at night made it hard to sleep," she said, surprised. "Not for me," he said with a small shrug. "You can watch TV or a movie if you want. I won't mind." He opened his suitcase and took out his shorts, realizing he couldn't exercise without his clothes. He knew he had to keep his underwear on. He didn't like changing his routine, but he had to this time. He changed out of his clothes and set them aside to put away later. He noticed Sam watching him closely. "What's wrong?" he asked. She looked at him seriously. "Lessons, huh? Were you a slow learner?" He smiled a bit awkwardly. "Actually, I learned faster than most." He didn't mention that many of the other agents in the program didn't make it past their 7th mission. Seeing her doubtful look, he wanted to explain, but couldn't share too much. Just really tough teachers. He moved to the far end of the room near the windows and shifted some furniture to make space for exercising. He glanced at Sam. "Try to stay clear of this area." When she nodded, he started. Today, he was practicing fighting techniques. He focused on punches and blocks before moving on to kicks and sweeps. These moves were challenging as hitting the wrong thing could lead to injuries. He had to stay focused, pushing away any distractions. As he finished the workout and began targeting specific muscle groups, he noticed Sam watching him from the bathroom doorway, looking a bit shy. He paused, breathing heavily. "Is something wrong?" She quickly stepped into the bathroom and closed the door softly. Hal wondered why she did that, but put it out of his mind to continue with his routine. He wrapped up his exercises when Sam came back. She wore a black shirt again, but had another one in her hands. He realized his own shirt was missing. He pointed to the spot where it had been and looked at her. "I'm wearing it," she said quietly. "It helps me feel better." Unsure how to reply, he picked up his shorts and went into the bathroom for a quick shower. When he came back, he found Sam relaxing on her bed, reading a book she'd taken from her backpack. She glanced at him. "Do you have any body fat?" she asked. He looked down at himself and poked at his sides, finding none. He shrugged, then put his dirty clothes in a laundry bag in his suitcase. He got out clothes for tomorrow and closed the case. He opened another suitcase and took out his knife and tools. He went back to the bathroom to clean and sharpen the blade properly. Once finished, he returned the kit to the suitcase and locked it up. He placed the knife on the nightstand. He took off the bedspread and put it in the hallway, but then remembered it might trip Sam later. Instead, he hung 2 coat hangers on the doorknob to alert them. Once that was done, he returned to his bed and lay down on top. "You don't get under the covers?" she asked. "No, I don't like the feeling of being held down. It's too easy to get tangled up." He tucked the knife under his pillow. Hal leaned back on the pillow, feeling his mind relax. He was surprised at how quickly this was happening, as he thought Sam's presence would be distracting. Instead, he felt at ease. That unfamiliar feeling led him into his deepest sleep in a long time. In the morning, they had breakfast at the small hotel restaurant, brushed their teeth, packed up, and headed to the car. Hal loaded their luggage and Sam's bag into the trunk and quickly checked the vehicle before opening the door for her. She looked at him with curiosity, but he just smiled and shook his head, not mentioning the handprint on the trunk. As they merged onto the interstate, he glanced at the cars in his rearview mirror, scanning for any that looked familiar. Nothing stood out. There were too many that looked the same. He decided to keep watching. If someone was following them, they would slip up eventually. Then they would be his. He felt a sense of eagerness building within him. The drive from St. Charles to Oklahoma City was long, and both were grateful for the hotel bed at the end of the day. They had found a comfortable rhythm on their road trip and were enjoying each other's company. Hal was mentally sorting through the vehicles that might be following them off the highway. The fact that they weren't being confronted suggested that someone might be keeping an eye on them to make sure everything was all right. But it could also mean there was someone else waiting for their chance to act. He stayed alert for that possibility. The next morning, Sam chose to wear one of her new dresses, and he complimented how lovely she looked in it. Although the dress was snug, Hal admired how it suited her without being revealing. He tried to focus on her smile instead of staring. It highlighted her long legs, and it was clear to Sam that Hal found her attractive. Her shy smiles showed she appreciated his attention. Her backpack didn't go with the dress, so it stayed in the trunk. They had less distance to cover than the day before, aiming for the smaller town of Santa Rosa, New Mexico. Hal had booked a motel room with 2 beds. As the landscape changed, Sam noticed Hal's mood was changing too. He wasn't much of a talker, and he seemed even quieter as he looked around. When they finally reached their stop and left the interstate, she noticed how focused he was on the rear-view mirror. There weren't many cars behind them. "Gotcha," Hal said quietly. Sam looked at him and then checked the back, but she didn't see anything unusual about the 3 cars coming down the ramp. "Is someone following us?" she asked, feeling uneasy. He nodded and drove onto Route 66, going up a hill for a short bit before turning into the parking lot of their motel. Hal parked the car in front of the office and got out to watch a dark sedan signal to turn into the gas station across the street, but then change its mind and keep going. Sam got out of the car and looked at Hal, worried. "They're gone. We'll see if they stop looking for us," Hal said, remembering every detail of what he had seen. "Are they going to hurt us?" Sam asked, her voice shaking. Hal turned his attention back to her and noticed how anxious she was. He shook his head. "I don't think so. I believe they are just watching us. If I'm wrong, please don't worry. I can handle this. I won't let them harm you." Sam smiled at him from across the hood of the car, but he could see she was still uneasy. He felt a strange need to protect her, and although that instinct worried him a little, he knew he had to focus on keeping her safe. He walked into the office with his hand on her back, which seemed to help calm her. He checked in and paid for the room, but the clerk gave him an odd look when he confirmed that there were 2 beds. The clerk seemed distracted. They drove a short distance to their room, and he backed the car into the spot in front. They brought their things inside, leaving Sam's backpack in the car, and took a look around. It was okay, not as nice as some other places they had stayed. "I'll take the bed closest to the door," he said. "Same rules as before, all right?" Sam nodded and smiled, remembering how well last night had gone. She'd only had to get up once, and he had responded right away when she called out. Even though he looked asleep, he was clearly a light sleeper. "Let's see what food we can find in Santa Rosa," Hal said with a smile, opening the map app on his phone. They checked their options and decided to try Joseph's Bar and Grill since it had some of Hal's favorite Mexican dishes. The drive was quick, and they managed to get a booth when they arrived. Hal encouraged Sam to try the chicken quesadillas while he ordered tamales. Hal surprised Sam by speaking Spanish to the waitress as she took their order. The young woman smiled broadly as she wrote it down. "You really have a knack for surprises. How many languages can you speak?" Sam joked. Hal smiled a bit shyly. "A few." Sam's eyes grew wide when she realized he was serious. "The mysterious Mr. Demon," she sighed, curious to know more. "Which ones?" she asked eagerly. Hal thought for a moment and decided he didn't need to explain why he learned the languages. Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Arabic, Russian, Turkish, Hindi, and of course English. "I'm not a master of all of them, but I can get by," he said. "To me, you sound like a native speaker of Spanish," she exclaimed. He looked out the window, lost in memories of his childhood. "I think I spent part of my early years in a town like this. It's bringing back memories. Not all of them are happy." Sam gave him a concerned look. "You don't remember where you grew up?" He shook his head and forced a smile. "It doesn't matter. That was in the past, and I'm focused on now," he said. He couldn't tell her how much he lost when the doctors treated him. All he knew was that the memories he had weren't joyful, but he could manage in society. She nodded, her gaze still fixed on him. "What about you? Do you ever want to learn another language?" he asked, changing the subject. She blushed. "I doubt I could pick up another language. Besides, English is spoken in so many places already." He chuckled. "It is, but not everywhere. If you go beyond big cities where global businesses are, you'll find that local languages are more common. In the countryside, local dialects take the lead. To them, the U.S. might feel very distant. One of the best lessons I've learned from traveling is that the world doesn't center around the U.S. I hope to travel one day. This trip has been eye-opening. I'm seeing so much of this country," Sam replied with a big smile. Hal found himself wanting to see her smiles more and more. He loved how her smile lit up her face and brought joy. His wish to see her happy made him uneasy. He wasn't sure what their future held. Everything depended on what would happen in Los Angeles. "What's wrong? You looked happy and then you seemed a little upset," she asked softly. "Upset? No, I haven't felt that way in a long time," he said. His thoughts drifted back to the difficult days after the trial when he was a teenager, away from Lisa and sent to the military hospital. There had been tears in the past and feelings he didn't want to face. The journey to become who he was now had been tough and painful, something he preferred not to think about. The waitress brought their plates and pulled him from his thoughts. He thanked her in Spanish and praised her and the restaurant staff for their quick service. The young woman smiled brightly and thanked him back before heading to the kitchen. "I think you enjoy that a lot," Sam said with a knowing smile. "It's true," he admitted. Hal then showed her how to eat her quesadillas. After her first bite, she smiled widely. "Oh my God, this is my new favorite meal," she said excitedly. Hal chuckled and enjoyed his meal. It was delicious, and he nodded in approval. They didn't spend time chatting when there was such good food to enjoy. Once they finished their main course, they ordered dessert. Sam chose coconut cream pie while Hal went for apple pie with ice cream. They both leaned back, feeling full, and agreed they had eaten too much. But they were happy. Hal relished the first true feelings of happiness he could remember. He felt relaxed, and Sam was delightful company. She enjoyed being with him, and there were no pressures or judgments. This peaceful moment felt precious and wonderful. He wondered why he had never felt this way with Lisa. Yes, she excited him, but soon he felt unworthy and anxious, and the pressure would build until he exploded in anger. Lisa would then have control over him. Now he feared his happiness might burst like a soap bubble. His worry over this new realization threatened to ruin his contentment. He tried to hide his feelings, but Sam noticed the change in his expression and looked at him with concern. He paid the bill and left a generous tip. They wandered into the gift shop and browsed the souvenirs. On a whim, Hal picked up a CD of classic music from the time of Route 66. Sam held up a dark blue T-shirt with a big route emblem on the front. He thought it would look great on her. She smiled at him playfully as she bit her lip. He took the shirt from her hands and added it to the CD at the counter while she giggled. They walked to the car, and Hal checked the area to make sure it was safe before getting in. His sense of peace began to fade. The hotel was a safe haven for the night. Hal locked the door and got ready. After the heavy meal, he decided to work out in the morning. He changed into his shorts while Sam was in the shower. When she came out of the bathroom, he noticed her long blonde hair was still damp. He suddenly felt a strong desire to touch it. "Can I brush your hair?" he asked, without thinking. Sam looked surprised, but smiled and nodded, giving him the brush as she sat at the foot of his bed. He moved closer and gently placed his hand on the back of her neck and her hair. She sighed as she enjoyed his kind touch. He brushed her lovely hair from the roots to the tips. He was amazed at how thick and soft it was. "Your hair feels great. Is the shampoo working well for you?" Hal asked gently. Feeling a warm flutter inside, she simply nodded. Once he finished brushing out the tangles, he admired how shiny her hair was. "Can I braid it for you?" he asked. She wanted to keep feeling his hands in her hair. "Yes, I mean if you want to," she replied softly. He used the comb to divide her hair and skillfully wove it into a strong braid. Sam tried to stay still as his hands moved through her hair, giving her a pleasant sensation as he worked. When he finished, she smiled and tied the end of the braid with a small band. "Thank you. You did a wonderful job with the braid," she said, a little breathless. "Your hair is incredible," Hal replied with an admiring smile. She blushed, and they both fell quiet, unsure what to say next. "I guess we should get to bed our own beds," Hal stammered. She laughed, feeling the tension ease, and nodded as she returned to her bed. When they were ready for sleep, Hal turned off the light and lay back. His hands itched to be in her hair again. He tried to push the thought away, but it took him longer than usual to relax that night. He couldn't see Sam's eyes watching him softly in the dim light. He didn't know she was feeling the same need to feel his hands on her again. Both found it hard to fall asleep. Sam woke up to a noise and opened her eyes. The clock between the beds showed it was just past 1 in the morning. She saw Hal sitting up in bed, breathing quickly. Maybe he had a bad dream. She heard keys clinking somewhere outside in the parking lot. Her gaze returned to the man in the next bed. She wanted to be close to him. He had treated her better than anyone ever had. He was gentle and kind, always happy to see her smile. She had caught him looking at her with a smile just like hers. She couldn't remember feeling this happy before. She knew he was facing some troubles in his life, and she had promised not to interfere, but seeing him so shaken was more than she could handle. She needed to help him go back to sleep. Sam pushed her sheets aside and walked to the side of his bed. Hal suddenly turned his head towards her and grabbed her throat. Before she could react, he lifted her off the ground and pressed her down onto his bed. His strong body was on top of hers, and his other hand covered her mouth, making it hard for her to breathe. She tried to push him away, but he was too strong. She looked up at him, but she could only see his face in the shadows. He seemed to be watching her quietly. Then she noticed something. He was tense, and it was pressing against her. She managed to turn her head to get a little air, feeling both scared and overwhelmed as he continued to stare at her without saying a word. She really needed to breathe, but his grip got tighter, and true fear washed over her. She thought he meant to cause her harm. Suddenly, loud noise came from outside their door. Hal glanced toward it. A sliver of light peeked through the curtains, briefly illuminating his face. His eyes looked cold and lifeless. The noise turned into the sound of a key fumbling at the door. They heard a slurring voice from outside. "Separate beds! Stupid man! Here! I've come to find you!" Hal jumped off the bed, releasing Sam so she could take a deep breath. As the door began to open, Hal's hand shot out to grab the man's throat. The man gasped in shock as Hal pulled him inside. Hal's other fist struck the man's face hard. The man fell back, losing consciousness. "Hal!" Sam managed to shout, though her voice was rough from earlier. Hal's second punch stopped just before it hit, and he swayed, letting go of the hotel clerk's neck. "Sam?" Hal's voice was filled with worry. "I'm okay. You didn't hurt me," she said, trying to reassure him. Hal turned on the lamp next to the door and looked down at the man lying in the doorway. "It's the clerk from the front desk." He leaned down to sniff. "I smell alcohol." Suddenly, red and blue lights shone through the doorway as a police car parked outside. The sheriff stepped out, put on his hat, and walked over to see the clerk. "So, what happened here?" the sheriff asked, looking at the marks on Hal's body. "The clerk tried to break in. I stopped him," Hal said sharply. He flinched when Sam lightly touched his arm. She had wrapped a sheet around herself and was standing next to him. "I heard this man say he was coming to see me." "He used rougher words," Sam explained to the sheriff. "So your partner got jealous and fought him?" the officer asked, noticing a mark on Sam's neck from Hal's grip. "We're not together," Sam quickly replied. The sheriff pointed to Hal's hand. "He seems to be involved with someone. That mark on your neck doesn't look good. Are you all right, miss?" The lawman put his hand on his belt, and Sam felt Hal tense up. She stood still. Hal tried to calm himself. He had prepared for this with his doctors. He had a plan to follow. "I have a serious case of PTSD. I was startled just before the clerk arrived." He looked at Sam. "I'm truly sorry for any distress I might have caused you." "It's okay," Sam insisted. "I should have called out to you. It was my mistake." The sheriff eyed Sam with concern, thinking she was just another person blaming herself for what happened. He turned to Hal. "I think you should leave Santa Rosa. Gather your things and go." Sam frowned, but Hal touched her arm and nodded to the sheriff. "We'll go right away." Hal signaled for Sam to get ready in the bathroom. He packed his suitcase, hiding a small tool he had kept under his pillow. When Sam came out with her things, Hal took his turn in the bathroom. When he emerged, the sheriff was speaking softly but firmly to Sam, clearly trying to help her escape from Hal. Hal could see that the sheriff had made up his mind, and Sam's reassurances were not convincing him. An ambulance arrived, and they watched as the clerk was loaded onto a stretcher and taken away. The man was starting to regain consciousness and complained about his sore nose. Once they could get to their car, Hal loaded their suitcases into the trunk. He held the door open for Sam and then faced the sheriff as he closed her door. You got here pretty fast after he broke in. Were you just passing by? The sheriff glared at Hal. We received an anonymous call from someone nearby. Hal looked across the parking lot to the gas station. A dark car was parked there, likely the concerned citizens. He nodded, walked to his door, and got in. Sam watched him nervously. He waited for the sheriff to return to his vehicle, then drove out of the parking lot. The sheriff followed closely behind, likely to ensure they left town. Hal watched in the rearview mirror as the sheriff continued to follow him. He merged back onto the interstate, and the sheriff went straight past the exit. A short while later, headlights appeared behind them on the highway. "Where are we going now?" Sam asked softly. Hal glanced at her, and sorrow gripped him as he realized he had hurt her. "I'm really sorry for what I did. I should have made sure we had separate rooms." "No! We were fine before. I made a mistake. That mistake nearly cost you everything because of me. I'm so sorry," he said, feeling overwhelmed. He clenched the steering wheel tightly. He focused on the road ahead and noticed the car behind them, keeping a safe distance. He hadn't realized how heavy his breathing had become, and tried to steady himself. "You're not a monster," Sam said quietly, almost as if she needed to convince herself. "I am. Part of me is," he confessed. "You said it was due to PTSD. "That's not true. I said that to the sheriff to keep it simple." He turned to her. "But you saw it. The dark side of me. It affected you." A shiver ran through him. "I can't let that happen again." They drove on in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "What? Where did that darkness come from?" Sam asked carefully. He gave her a sad look before focusing on the road. It felt easier to talk that way. "It has always been part of me. Now, it's just hidden away. I'm not supposed to talk about it, but since it nearly harmed you, you deserve to know. Please don't tell anyone. It's not safe for you." He held her gaze, and she nodded, her eyes wide with concern. Hal squirmed inside, knowing he was the cause of that fear, which he never wanted for her. She didn't deserve it. "You're married." Her straightforward comment hit him hard. He nodded. "She knows." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Have you ever hurt her?" He took a painful breath. Sam didn't know how heavy her questions felt, but he struggled with the weight. "Yes." "Is that why you're going to L.A.? Did she leave you?" Sam asked gently. She was so off track that Hal let out a small laugh of relief, then quickly closed his mouth. He needed to respond. "No, she hasn't left me." He realized he wished she would. It would make things simpler. "She won't, not until she gets what she wants." "What?" "Please, I can't." Hal tightened his grip on the wheel until he felt the stitching bite into his skin. He forced himself to relax. "I'm sorry," Sam said. "I care about you. I don't like seeing you in pain, and I want to help. If talking can help you, I'm here to listen." Hal felt a strange urge to laugh, but he kept it inside. The woman he almost harmed wanted to help him? Thank you. As soon as he said it, he felt how little those words seemed. This woman, who seemed out of place in his complex life, had somehow found a way into his heart and mind. Until now, that space had been reserved only for Lisa. No one else had ever come close to challenging the hold Lisa had over him. He wasn't sure what to do with this realization. It didn't fit with his current life. He wasn't free of Lisa. Her influence on him was still strong, deeply embedded since they'd first met in high school. She had shaped his life and his choices ever since. After he was sent away to the army, they'd been separated for more than 10 years. When he came back, he was a changed man. His time in training had transformed him, equipping him with skills to blend into society while also being what his team needed him to be. That first day back, Lisa had tested him, trying to see if he was still the person she once knew. He remembered every detail about her and gave her the reassurance she wanted. When she still hinted at pushing him away, he felt the tension rise, and a part of him he tried to control slipped through. That day, she had smiled at him with satisfaction, her look anchoring him to her once more. His handler had once warned that Lisa might become a problem if she interfered with his performance. Hal managed to convince him otherwise, showing that he could still achieve his objectives with skill and precision. His success rate proved that he could handle his assignments effectively, and his handler reluctantly allowed him to marry Lisa. Their early years of marriage were peaceful. He managed to keep her content and balanced without letting his darker side show. However, There were times when things became strained. During those rough patches, Lisa had a way of drawing out intense reactions in him. She'd go out, flirt, and test boundaries, as if seeking to provoke him. Her goal seemed to be to stir his jealousy, to see how far she could push him. He tried to remain calm in those situations, to talk through them, but it rarely worked. Her approach to provoking strangers often led to tense confrontations. His frustration would build, and sometimes it would break through. He had come close to losing control more than once, the intensity of these confrontations leaving a mark on both him and his memories. Later, she claimed the man had made her too drunk to know what was happening. Lisa was always there to face his darker side after it had dealt with its problems, and it took its toll on her. During this time, his supervisor returned to warn him that Lisa's troublemaking, if it didn't stop, would need to be addressed. While Hal's work had not suffered, the chance was growing that Lisa would push him into situations they couldn't handle. But this warning stayed just a warning, as he had become too important to the project to risk affecting his mood and work. He realized he wasn't content, and Lisa's need to explore his dark side kept growing. As it did, his happiness shrank, but Lisa was satisfied because she was getting what she wanted, as she always did. Their recent moment in the shower, when he lost control, opened his eyes. He understood she wouldn't stop until he hurt her in some way. That thought scared him, but he felt powerless in their relationship. Then came Chet. Hal found the man in the waiting area of the dental office where Lisa worked. The moment they locked eyes, Hal knew he was facing another threat, one who'd been visiting his wife at work. Chet was tall, young, attractive, tan, and had a strong build. He could easily blend in with college athletes or surfers, but his cold, lifeless eyes gave away his true nature. Before Hal could figure out his next move, Chet strolled to the front desk, and told the office assistant he'd reschedule. Then he looked at Hal and told her to inform Lisa he'd see her at their 6 p.m. appointment on the 20th. Hal was puzzled as the man smirked and left. When Hal asked Lisa about Chet's mention of 6 p.m. on the 20th, she said Chet must have been mistaken since she would be in L.A. at a conference. She laughed off his request to have Chet see another hygienist. Her small, satisfied smile hit him hard. At that moment, he realized Lisa could be just as dangerous. They stopped in Albuquerque to get a hotel room to rest. While Sam spoke softly, she insisted that being in a room with him made her feel safer than being alone, especially with people following them. Hal didn't have the energy to argue, especially when she touched his arm and looked up at him. He repeated the rules, and then they managed to catch up on some sleep. They started later than usual, but they had already covered some of the day's distance. They enjoyed brunch in Gallup, visiting an Applebee's once again. It was clear that Sam really liked this place. As for Sam, she was wearing her blue Route 66 shirt and light gray yoga pants, which caught the attention of the waitstaff and Hal. She seemed pleased with the attention. When he asked her about her outfit, she put on a cute, innocent look. Her cheerful laugh when he stopped asking made him smile. Her happiness brought him joy, and he found himself wishing for a future where he could hear her laugh every day. While driving west, the countryside changed a lot. But Hal couldn't shake some old memories that came rushing back. After a while, he decided he needed a break. He pulled into a rest area and got out to stretch his legs. Sam joined him, watching his face for any signs of what was bothering him. He noticed her concern, and it made him smile. He almost reached for her to hug her, but stopped and crossed his arms instead. "Is something wrong? Can I help?" she asked. He sighed, thinking it might be good to share what was on his mind. He pointed to the landscape around them. "Thinking about my childhood in places like this has been on my mind all day. This place feels familiar. It's hot and dry, and I keep remembering feelings of pain and loneliness." He felt a jolt when Sam wrapped her arms around him in a hug. He uncrossed his arms and returned the embrace, feeling comfortable. The hug was warm and comforting. When she pulled back, Hal tried to hide his disappointment, but might have made a small sound when she smiled brightly at him. "You need something to take your mind off things," she said, glancing into the car and spotting the CD Hal had bought. "Let's listen to the CD and sing along." "Sing?" Hal said in surprise. "Come on, I know I have a terrible voice, but I'll sing if it helps you," she said with a playful grin. "I think your voice is great," he said, and then regretted it. "Oh, thanks, but I don't know why you would think that. It's a bit scratchy." Her cheeks turned a nice shade of pink, but her eyes sparkled. He locked the car and they walked to the washrooms. Hal waited while Sam went into the ladies' room, and then they headed back to the car. He kept an eye out for anyone following them. He didn't see anyone in the parking lot at first, but then spotted a dark sedan parked on the road nearby. He thought about checking it out, but decided against it since it would put him out in the open. Instead, he opened the door for Sam and closed it gently after she got in. His old habits were returning strongly. They got back on the highway and Sam opened the CD case, putting the disc in the player. As the music started, Sam turned up the volume. She smiled at Hal and began to sing along to Nat King Cole's Route 66. Hal smiled, knowing her voice was just as charming as her laughter and giggles. "Why aren't you singing with me?" she asked, pouting a little. "2 reasons," he replied. "I don't know the words, and your singing is so great that I would ruin it if I joined in." She rolled her eyes. "Now I know you're joking. My singing sounds awful. Frank used to tell me to be quiet when he heard me sing. My family was the same way. Mom always said I didn't have a beautiful voice, so I should express myself in other ways." She shrugged with a small smile, looking at her nails. "Your mom was wrong, and I could really use a word with Frank," he said, clearly upset. He tried to calm down and looked at Sam, who was watching him with big eyes. He softened his expression. "I'm sorry for speaking about your mom like that, but she didn't get it, and Frank still deserves a talking to." She smiled shyly. "You really think my singing is good?" "I love your singing," he insisted. Sam beamed, and she started singing again, putting her heart into it. Hal smiled, enjoying the joy on her face. She loved to sing, and others had tried to stop her. How silly of them. She wasn't off-key at all, and her voice was strong. The only complaint anyone could have might be about its roughness, but Hal thought it was charming. He recalled how successful Rod Stewart and Kim Carnes were with their unique voices, and believed Sam sang even better than both. They drove on toward Flagstaff, with Sam singing joyfully, and Hal feeling less weighed down by memories of a tough childhood. Sam was thrilled as they entered the parking lot of their hotel near the highway junction in Flagstaff. They had played all the songs on the CD and were searching for radio stations throughout the empty landscape. "There's a supercenter close by. We can walk over and get some more CDs for the next part of our trip," Hal suggested, and she nodded eagerly. "There's also an Olive Garden nearby." "I would love to walk a bit after all that driving," she said with a big smile. "Me too." They grabbed their bags and went inside to check in. "Hi, reservation for Demon?" he said to the friendly clerk at the counter. She looked up his name. "Yes, I have you here for one night, a single king-sized bed." "No, sorry, I need 2 beds." "We need 2 beds," he said, stumbling over his words. The young woman looked at both of them, then back at her computer. "Let me see if I can find another room for you. We're quite busy tonight. I have one room facing the courtyard with a balcony available." "We'll take it," Hal said, feeling relieved. They completed the reservation, and soon they had key cards and were going up to their second-floor room. Once inside, Sam hurried to the patio doors and stepped out onto the balcony. "Oh, this is lovely," she said, smiling as she took in her surroundings. She turned to Hal, her face bright with happiness. The late afternoon sun warmed her features, and Hal found himself caught off guard. He had never seen anyone look so radiant. She seemed to embody peace and joy. His mind quickly compared her to Lisa, and it felt like a shock. This realization shook him. Sam and Lisa were nothing alike. Sam was innocent and gentle, while Lisa thrived on control. Sam calmed him, while Lisa caused him stress. Even their color choices seemed different. Light versus dark. Why did it take being with Sam to realize how dull his life had become? "Are you okay?" He snapped back to reality, standing at the open patio doors. Sam was looking at him with a look of kindness and concern. "You think? I want to talk to you about Lisa, my wife." Her eyes widened in surprise. He cleared his dry throat. "Later, after dinner and shopping." "Okay, sure. That sounds good," she replied softly, smiling. He suddenly felt the urge to kiss her, but quickly stepped back. "Sorry, we should get going." "I'm hungry. Are you hungry?" he babbled. She nodded and locked the patio door. They grabbed their keys and went downstairs. Once outside, she looked at him with curiosity. He pointed to the north corner of the parking lot. They found a sidewalk that led them to the restaurant. They had a short wait, standing outside among other hungry guests. Two couples were obviously together, and all four seemed to be staring at Sam. While the women were slim like Sam, they drew less attention than their partners, who had bigger stomachs. Hal overheard the men making rude comments which made their companions laugh. He began to feel irritated. He looked at Sam and was surprised to see a serious expression on her face. She met his gaze. "Can you trust me?" she whispered, and he nodded. She moved behind him and he felt her closeness. She turned him a little to face the four people watching and rested her chin on his shoulder. Her hands wrapped around him, making him feel uneasy. He noticed that the four had stopped talking, but they were paying close attention. Sam gripped the bottom of his shirt with one hand and slowly lifted it, revealing his toned stomach. She ran her other hand over his muscles, observing the reactions of the couples watching her. She pulled him back slightly toward her. "At least I don't have to pretend," she said with a laugh. The two men looked at Sam with anger, but they were clearly intimidated by Hal's strong build and the signs of a difficult past. The two women shifted uncomfortably as they glanced at Hal. When their eyes met his, they stepped back behind their partners, looking uneasy. Deciding they would go somewhere else, the four left for the parking lot. Sam let go of his shirt and took a small step back, though she still leaned against him. She rested her forehead on the back of Hal's neck, and her hands settled on his shoulders. Hal felt her shivering. "Hey, I've never heard you speak like that before. Are you okay?" She took a deep breath. "No, that was tougher than I thought." He let her gather herself. "Well, what you said really hit hard. Not my words." He turned slightly but couldn't see her. "It sounded like you were talking." She chuckled softly, and he felt her breath on his neck. "The words were from someone else, a lady I used to work with. She was fiery and knew how to stand her ground." "She sounds interesting." She was... Her voice was quieter then, and Hal sensed her sadness. "Frank." Sam rested her cheek on his shoulder, her sadness rising. She wrapped her arms around him again, seeking comfort. She smiled slightly when he placed his hands over hers. She must have had a rough time with him. He hurt her. After that, she just vanished. Hal had heard enough. Frank wouldn't get away with it. Hal had ways of dealing with people like him. He would find a way to make sure Frank didn't trouble anyone again. "Demon?" a voice called. Hal sighed, and Sam laughed lightly as she released him. He turned and raised a hand to show they were approaching. "Oh!" Sam exclaimed in surprise. He glanced at her and noticed her face was quite pink. She was looking down at the front of his pants. Quickly, he put his hands in front of himself. Sorry about that. It's from earlier when you were touching my stomach, not from just now." He felt his own face heat up as he stumbled over his words. She smiled playfully. "It's nice to know I can still make an impression on someone." He waved her ahead into the restaurant, partly to hide his embarrassment behind her and partly to admire her in those snug yoga pants. Of course, this didn't help him with the first issue. He realized he might need to get some jeans that were thicker to keep things under control. Once seated, Sam couldn't hide the grin on her face. "What?" Hal finally asked. "Sorry, I'm just feeling so good about myself. I can't remember the last time I felt this way. This might be the best day of my life." Hal froze at her words. For him, the day began with much darker thoughts. His surprise must have shown as she waved a hand to clarify. "I mean, since we woke up in that hotel in Albuquerque," she explained. "Ah," he replied, nodding. He ordered soup, salad, and breadsticks since it was enough for him, and he wasn't very hungry. Sam decided on lasagna. "I wonder if we'll run into more of Frank's friends here," Hal speculated, glancing around at the other diners. But when he looked back at Sam, her expression was one of real concern. "Hey, I was just joking. There's nothing to worry about. I can handle anything Frank throws at us. Unless he has a trained bear. Then we might be in trouble." Sam snorted at his bad joke, finding it funny despite herself. But then her face turned serious. "I am worried about people following us." He nodded in agreement. "They might work for my employers, just keeping an eye on me." Given how quickly I noticed them and how poorly they've been hiding, it seems more likely they are connected to the people we dealt with back in Columbus. Connected to Frank. He looked at her, nodding again. Yeah, it's possible, but they haven't made any moves, and they know that we see them. If they do anything, it won't end well for them. They must know that too. They are probably tracking us for Frank or someone tied to him. He paused, thinking about what it took to get Sam back safely. He studied her closely, noticing her eyes widen. What's wrong? She asked. Why are they still after you after all this time? Do you have something they want? What's in that backpack? She looked defensive. Just some personal things. A small family photo album. Some keepsakes from my childhood that I hold on to are my address book and my favorite books. He frowned. None of that sounds like it would matter to someone like Frank. I mean, aside from his tendency to be mean. Their food arrived, and they continued discussing what the men might want from her. She told Hal that she didn't know anything about Frank's business. She was never around when he had meetings or talked about work on the phone. He would usually tell her to go away. After finishing their dinner, they decided to take a walk. The evening was nice, but it was getting cooler, and Sam's t-shirt wasn't warm enough, so they would get her a sweater. They crossed the street and headed to Walmart. Hal grabbed a shopping cart, and Sam smiled back at him as they walked in. He took her to the entertainment section, where they picked out some CDs with songs she liked to sing. This made her really happy, which in turn made him happy. He also picked up a pack of 3 black shirts and teased her with a fake glare. You keep making my shirts a mess. Sam started to giggle, creating a joyful sound that made him smile. Next, he found a pink hoodie for her, which would keep her warm on their way back to the hotel. Do you think it's time to get a new backpack? Hal asked, and she looked at him with wide eyes. You can keep the big items in your suitcase and get a smaller bag for the things you want to carry. What do you think? Sam nodded slowly. Let's take a look and see what they have, he suggested, and she seemed more relaxed. It took a bit of time to find the accessories section, but they had a good variety of bags. Some were backpacks, which seemed to be her favorite style. She spotted a nice black leather bag with gold zippers and buckles. Hal saw her glance at the price and quickly placed it back on the shelf. Then he picked it up again and examined it. It looked well made to him. Do you like this one? Is it big enough for your things? It's too expensive. I'll decide that. You just need to tell me if it works for you, he calmly replied while holding her gaze. So? She bit her lip and nodded. He placed it in the cart. As they walked toward the checkout, Sam linked her arm through his. Thank you for being so kind to me. Better than anyone else has ever been, she said softly. You don't need to thank me, you're worth it. You've helped me a lot, too, he replied. And the CDs are a gift for me so I can enjoy your singing tomorrow. She smiled at him, and he felt lost in her happiness. He felt the urge to kiss her again but turned his face away to find the nearest cashier. He pushed the cart into the line, and a few minutes later they were all set to leave. He had the cashier take off the tags from the sweater, so Sam put it on and zipped it up. He thought she looked lovely in it, very huggable. He tried to push that thought away. Next she put on the purse and he nodded with approval. That looks really nice. Sam was bouncing on her toes with excitement. Hal noticed that this made her look even more cheerful, and it caught everyone's attention. He took her arm and led her out of the store. They strolled arm in arm across the parking lot and laughed as they crossed the street to the hotel. It wasn't long before they arrived at their room. Sam set her new purse on the bed next to her backpack, while Hal filled 2 glasses with water. They went outside to sit on the balcony. She smiled at him, and he couldn't help but smile back. They relaxed and enjoyed the quiet together for a while until Hal felt ready to talk. He was grateful she hadn't pushed him to start the conversation. He needed to figure out what to say, what was safe for her to hear. She couldn't know about his job or what he did. That wasn't important. What mattered was the troubled side of him that he was battling, and Lisa's desire to understand it better. As he began to share, a voice in his head urged him to stop. He knew that telling Sam these secrets might send her away, but wouldn't that be best for her? Breakfast was quiet the next morning. Sam was still thinking about what he had revealed the night before. Finding out she was staying with a man who struggled with controlling a dark side was hard to take. Even worse, she had felt that dark side for herself. She knew for sure that it was real. Hal gave her space that morning. While he thought it might be better for her to keep a distance, he realized she didn't have many choices left. She had to keep moving forward with him. The idea that she was with him out of necessity and not desire made him feel awful. His sadness must have been visible because, as they finished their meals, he felt her soft hand cover his on the table. Surprised, he looked up to see her small smile and the kindness in her eyes. Something stirred inside him, a feeling he couldn't ignore. "I'm sorry for making you sad, Hal. You've been so kind to me since that diner back in Rochester, and here I am judging you." "No, you have to. You've seen my other side, and that means I'm not always safe to be around. You have to protect yourself," he said with urgency. "But you look so unhappy," she replied. He turned his hand over to hold hers and gently rubbed the back of it with his thumb. He kept his gaze on their hands, trying to find the right words. "For the first time in my life, I am truly happy, free from the worry and fear that surrounded me during my marriage. It's sad that I scared you away, but I get it. I know I don't deserve this, and you should keep your distance because you're a kind person. The truth is, I'm not," Sam protested softly as she held his hand tighter. "You are a good person. You just have some struggles inside you. I see now that you can't just get rid of it, but at least you have found a way to keep it calm." She sighed. "I can't say I'll ever feel completely at ease around it. It's like having something dangerous in the house. But I lived with Frank for almost 12 years. He was much worse, as I never knew if he would be loving or suddenly angry. You are far more steady than he ever was, and you follow fewer rules." She looked at him with hope. "I'd like to stay by your side a little longer if I could." Hal felt a wave of relief wash over him, and he breathed out a sigh he didn't know he was holding. He automatically lifted her hand and gently kissed her knuckles. Then he realized what he had done and pulled back. His eyes widened in surprise as he looked at her to check how she felt. Her cheeks were a lovely shade of pink, and her eyes sparkled with joy. "I'm so sorry. I have no idea why I did that," Hal stammered. A wide smile appeared on her face. "No one has ever kissed my hand like that. How sweet of you. I didn't mean to. It's okay, I'm not upset. In fact, I'm flattered," she said, which made him smile shyly. "Can I have my hand back?" she asked with a playful smile. "Of course," he exclaimed, quickly letting her fingers go and leaning back in his chair. She laughed and leaned back too. "Are we going to L.A. today?" "No, I have one more night to go before L.A. We'll be stopping in Las Vegas tonight." Sam's face lit up with excitement. "I've always wanted to visit Las Vegas." Her joyful grin made his heart race, and he realized he didn't want to be without it. "I have the hotel room booked for 3 days. I hadn't planned to stay in L.A. I don't fit in there, so after my meeting, I'll head back to Vegas." He looked into her eyes, seriousness in his expression. "I won't be taking you to L.A. with me. I'd like you to wait for me in Vegas." "Why? Why can't I come with you?" Sam asked, surprised. "I told you about Lisa and her desire to control my struggles, right? She's been meeting someone just like me at her dental office. There's a good chance she'll be with him in L.A. She denied it, but she was just trying to manipulate me again, creating doubt and anxiety, hoping to force me to act out of character." He reached out and took Sam's hand again. "What we didn't think about was my meeting you. Now I know what real happiness feels like. My marriage is a messy version of what it should be. It has to end." "Then just walk away. Don't go to L.A., she said, holding on to his hand. He smiled softly. "I need to tell Lisa that she no longer has my heart. I'm free of her now. I can finally do that. Thanks to you." She smiled back and a tear danced down her cheek. But worry came to her face. "You said this man is like you. Will it be safe to face them together?" "That's just it. I'm not going to face them. That's what she wants, but I don't care anymore. They can be together. I don't feel trapped by her anymore. I don't feel anything for her. I'm going to tell her I want a divorce." Hal felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. He could never have said the word divorce before, so tangled he had been in trying to please Lisa. Now he saw how unfair their relationship really was. Sam's smile was bright, filling Hal with joy, making him want to kiss her hand again. That made her giggle, and the sound filled him with happiness, confirming his new direction. They left the restaurant, Sam's arm linked with Hal's. He helped her into the passenger seat and looked out across the parking lot. He noticed a dark sedan parked far away. His mind told him to grab his suitcase and take care of the people behind them, but it was too public, and they would see him. So he got in the car, buckled his seatbelt, and drove them back on the road. Soon they were on Interstate 40 heading for Kingman. Sam smiled at him as she picked CDs from her new purse. He smiled back, and the trip to Kingman was filled with music. Hal made stops for breaks or to stretch his legs, and each time he checked if they were being followed, driving into alleys and turning around. But he couldn't lose them, which meant they must have put a tracker on his car. That was quite advanced for people like them. It made him wonder if they had a connection to his past, but they were so obvious it still felt uncertain. He remembered the handprint on the trunk. Maybe it was hidden under the car at the back. He would make a call when they reached Kingman. Sam stayed quiet during these moments, accepting he needed to check for good reasons, and he was thankful for her understanding. When they left the highway in Kingman, Hal stopped for gas, and Sam used the restroom. He looked around and saw something useful. After paying for the gas, he took out his phone and dialed a number. Report. I have someone following me. Is it official? There was a pause. No. Do you need help? No, it's fine. I have another question. Chet Barley. Is he someone I should worry about? Hal had researched that name. The handler made a sound of surprise and replied in a stiff tone. No, just stay away from him. He could be a risk if he tries to get in touch with you. Did he contact you? Hal paused to think. A risky person wouldn't generally be involved with his wife. Might have been by chance, but I don't think so. They met at the dental office where Lisa works. He decided not to mention his upcoming meeting in Los Angeles. That's not good. Just stay away. We will take care of it. Anything else? Hal noticed the man seemed anxious. Maybe he needed some positive news. I'm planning to tell Lisa I want a divorce. What? Why? Is it because of Chet? The handler sounded shocked. I thought you'd be happy, Hal replied, feeling let down. I am. It's just, it's about Sam. The handler's voice dropped as he realized the reason behind Hal's decision. So, you're not okay with it? Hal asked. I finally feel good about something. No, it's fine. We'll discuss this later. I need to handle another matter. Then the call ended. Hal put his phone away as Sam returned to the car and he handed her some money. Please get some snacks and drinks and some water for me. We're skipping lunch today, Hal said. She nodded and quickly went to the small shop, returning soon with the items. He opened the door for her and then drove to a nearby car service center. He parked the car in one of the open bays, but a mechanic rushed over to let him know they had another customer waiting. Sorry, I drove over something on the highway and I'm worried it might have damaged something important. I just need a quick look. I heard a noise from the back. It won't take long, he said, motioning for Sam to step out so they could check together. Everyone's attention turned to Sam as she stepped out of the car. Hey, can you check under the car for me? The man nearby called out to the mechanic working below. The mechanic started looking under the vehicle until he reached the area behind the rear bumper. Cliff, come over here and see what this is, a voice called from under the car. The man next to Hal frowned. What do you see? Looks like something trapped on a magnet and it has an antenna, the mechanic replied. Cliff's eyes widened as he looked from Sam to Hal. Maybe I should take it off, Hal suggested, and Cliff pointed him toward the stairs leading to the pit. Hal hurried down to join the mechanic and saw what he was referring to. It was a tracking device with a range of several miles. They likely changed the batteries every night while he slept. He reached up and pulled the device from its place on the frame, and the mechanic yelled in surprise. Hal just looked at the scared man. What was that, man? That could have been dangerous, the younger man shouted. Hal shook his head with a frown and went back upstairs to see Sam watching him with wide, worried eyes. He smiled at her and she smiled back, trusting him right away. Looks like nothing was broken, thanks. He nodded to Sam, who picked up her things and got back in the car. Hal slipped a 20 to Cliff and got in to drive the vehicle out of the bay as the mechanic stared at them in confusion. Hal knew someone was following them, so he drove around the back of the shopping center in the delivery lane and sped up quickly. Sam gasped in surprise as he abruptly slowed down when they reached the other end. He turned right to follow the lane beside the building as fast as he could and rushed through the parking lot to exit south onto the main road that led back to the highway. Speeding up again, he caught up to a line of cars heading for the highway entrance. The light ahead turned green, and the traffic began to move. Pulling up next to a truck carrying a bulldozer, Hal lowered Sam's window and tossed a device out, watching it bounce across the flatbed until it latched onto the side of the truck. He quickly moved into the left turn lane and drove away from the truck, which continued up the ramp. Hal checked the road and his mirrors for signs of the dark car behind them. He knew his trick wouldn't work for long, but they were at the interchange where he could go west toward Los Angeles or north toward Las Vegas. They wouldn't know which way he would choose. Instead of either, Hal drove north through Kingman on Highway 20, heading into the desert. "Is this the road to Las Vegas?" Sam asked. He smiled. "The scenic route. More time to hear you sing." Sam grinned happily and looked through her music for the next track. The miles flew by, even though he had taken a longer route. By mid-afternoon, they reached Hoover Dam, and Sam was amazed by how big it was. They decided not to take the tour because Sam was eager to get to Vegas. Hal kept an eye out for the dark car, but it seemed his plan had worked. Another sign of how poorly they were doing their job. Sam was almost bouncing with excitement as they saw the city come into view. Hal drove past the big hotels so she could see them, planning to take her for a closer look later. As he headed back to their hotel, Sam turned to him with a big smile. "This place is amazing." He thought her bright smile was far more beautiful than anything the city could offer. The Enchant Resort was one of the newer hotels, and Hal found a good price for a room. He hadn't realized there was a big event happening at the nearby convention center. Some of the hotel's halls were being used for the overflow. Hal parked at the valet desk. He handed over the key and got a ticket. Then they took their luggage. "What's the event for? Is it something related to the entertainment industry?" Sam joked. He laughed and looked for any signs to see who was attending. Two tall, beautiful women, one blonde and one brunette in long flowing dresses, walked by and caught everyone's attention. Hal took Sam's arm and gently guided her to the side of the hallway. He pulled her into a warm hug, turning away from the two women. Sam was surprised at first, but quickly hugged him back. Hal enjoyed the comfort of the embrace, but kept an eye on the brunette until she walked into one of the convention halls. He let go of Sam and she looked into his eyes. "What was that for?" Sam asked cheerfully with a bright smile. Hal felt a little embarrassed. He didn't want to tell her it was to avoid being noticed by the brunette. It was better for Sam to not know the whole story. Still, he truly enjoyed the hug. "I want to thank you for traveling with me, for keeping me calm and entertained with your singing, and for helping me think about my life and marriage. I can't say enough how much it means to me." "The hug was a great start," she replied with a grin. Hal's attention shifted to a group of men in military uniforms passing by. Behind them, three older men with long hair and beards were animatedly discussing something that was over Hal's head. Following them were four women in business suits chatting and laughing. Hal turned back to Sam, puzzled. "What is this event about?" They brought their luggage to the reception desk, and Hal moved through the crowd to check in while Sam held their bags. When he came back, she noticed he looked upset. "What's wrong? The room I booked only has one king bed, and they're fully booked. Most hotels in Vegas are too." Sam stepped closer and rested her hands on his shoulders as she looked into his eyes. "I wouldn't mind sharing a bed with you." Her words were clear. He felt a strong connection with her, and it showed as she leaned in to kiss him. Her lips were just as sweet and soft as he had imagined, filling him with joy. This woman was everything that was different from Lisa. She was real and kind, loving, and she wanted him, flaws and all. His mind felt like it might burst from the thrill he felt, and then Lisa's face appeared in his thoughts. He pulled away from those beautiful lips and took a shaky breath. Wait, oh my goodness. What's wrong? Don't you want this? I do," she whispered, a little out of breath. Yes, I do," he sighed, and her smile came back as she leaned in again. He almost went along with it, but at the last moment, he gently pushed her back. "I want this more than anything, but I need to tell her it's over first. I have to end my marriage before I can start something new with you. Is that okay?" She touched her forehead to his. "Yes, I can wait." Just knowing you want me is enough for now. Let's grab our things upstairs, freshen up, and find a place to eat. After that, we can take a walk and see the sights. We can sort out where we'll sleep later," Hal suggested softly. Sam nodded and smiled at him with sparkle in her eyes. They took the elevator to their floor, and Hal let Sam open the door with her key. She skipped into the room, excited about the decor, and rushed to the window. "Oh, Hal, the view is amazing!" she exclaimed, leaning against the window and looking down at the rows of fancy hotels. He watched her enjoying this new experience, and her happiness filled him with joy. "Yes, it really is." She turned back to him, beaming. "You're making it hard for me to not kiss you." Hal raised his hands playfully. He looked in his suitcase. "I don't have any nice clothes for dinner," he sighed, showing her his brown suit. Sam wrinkled her nose at it, and he nodded. "I'll check out the shop in the lobby. Would you like to join me? Maybe they have something nice for you, too?" She quickly came to take his arm. They walked back to the concourse next to the lobby and explored a few shops. Hal found himself a dark casual jacket and pants, a white dress shirt, and black loafers. Sam hit the jackpot with a fitted dress covered in gold sequins that highlighted her shape and ended mid-thigh. She paired it with beautiful gold high heels. She glowed happily after he told her she looked stunning. He also bought her a little gold purse to match. They decided to wear their new clothes back to their room to drop off their old outfits. Sam moved her things from her backpack to the smaller purse. While doing this, she dropped her book, and a small folded note that had been used as a bookmark slipped out. Hal bent down to pick them up. As he unfolded the note to read the writing, he paused and glanced at Sam. "Where did you get this note?" She shrugged. "I lost my old bookmark." There was an old notepad on the table by the phone in the kitchen at Frank's place. "I took the top sheet to use as a bookmark." "Why?" He tucked the paper into his pocket and then made her a new bookmark using another piece of paper from the pad near the hotel room's telephone. "Does Frank have a good memory?" he asked her carefully. She scoffed as she looked at him. "No, he scribbles notes for himself and leaves them everywhere," she said, eyeing him with curiosity. He nodded, understanding why Frank was keen on keeping Sam close. "Let's go eat." They walked arm in arm back to the elevator and rode it down to the lobby again. "You look lovely tonight. Really stunning," he told her, enjoying her cheerful smile. "Thank you, kind sir. You look very handsome," she began, but her words turned into a scream of fear as a group of men walking by suddenly pushed them through double doors into a staff-only area. 8 serious-looking men were trying to pull them away from the public. One covered Sam's mouth with his hand and lifted her against him, dragging her further down the hallway. Sam still managed to squeal in panic. Hal felt a surge of determination as the large men approached. A calm feeling washed over him, and he moved ahead of the group. He quickly broke 3 fingers of the first man who charged at him, weakening the man's grip. Then he shoved his thumb into the eye of the second attacker. The man yelled out, releasing Hal's jacket. With his left hand, Hal landed a solid punch on the first man's lower body. The man collapsed, unable to stay standing. Hal stepped back to block their way as more attackers leapt over their fallen friends. These men had knives, but the nearest one rushed forward with his arm outstretched. Instead of moving back, Hal moved forward, spinning to let the knife just miss him, slicing through his jacket. He caught the man's arm, then drove a heavy blow against his elbow, disabling the arm. The man didn't have time to react before Hal took control of the knife. The next 2 attackers stepped back, watching their friend fall down. Now, Hal stood ready with the knife in his hand, fending off the others, flicking it so the blade splattered nearby. The man holding Sam shifted her, reaching for something. As soon as her mouth was free, she screamed, loudly. He quickly covered her mouth again. Suddenly, the double doors swung open, and a big man in a dark suit rushed in. He frowned when he saw the fear on Sam's face and stepped closer to her. The 2 men in the back made the mistake of trying to pull out their weapons. One man, standing between Sam and the newcomer, found himself on the ground, unable to move. He had not seen the punch coming. The second man staggered back when a knife thrown from the doorway hit his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, his arm limp, before the big man's strong fist knocked him out too. The tall, beautiful brunette Sam had noticed when she arrived at the hotel stepped up next to the big man. She held a knife in each hand and smiled confidently. Sam was amazed by how both beautiful and fierce she looked. As her mouth was uncovered again, Sam felt the man behind her reaching into his jacket. He was going for a weapon. She tried to glance at Hal, but her captor kept her blocked from the others. Sam heard a sudden sound from behind her. Her captor froze, trembled, and then collapsed to the floor. Startled, Sam looked back and saw that the man who had grabbed her was gone, a knife sticking out of the side of his head. She turned to Hal in shock as he prepared to confront the last two men. You should be dead!" the tall brunette shouted at Hal, yet his attention remained on the two men in front of him. The two men were unsure whether to face the unarmed but still dangerous man or the woman with the knives behind them. Sam felt a gentle touch on her arm and saw the big man motioning for her to come with him. "I need Hal," Sam said softly. He glanced at Hal. "I don't think he's in any trouble now." He then looked at the tall brunette. "Tatiana, don't hurt Hal." "Ben, he's a threat," she replied sharply. The big man glared at her. "And you weren't?" Just then, the blonde friend appeared in the doorway, knives in her hands too. "Ben, can't you avoid trouble for a moment?" She stood next to the brunette and quickly sized up the two unsure men. Sam looked at Ben, then at the two women who were ready to protect them. Her gaze returned to Ben, noticing the scars on his face. The news stories flooded back to her mind. "You're the man from TV with the sculptures!" she exclaimed, amazed to be in a rundown hallway with someone so well known. Although the media often spoke poorly of him, her personal experience was very different. Ben looked at Sam and saw that she recognized the situation. He let out a sigh and turned his attention to the man named Hal. Hal seemed ready to confront the remaining goons and possibly Ben's two bodyguards. He asked Sam, "Do you think you can get Hal to calm down?" She nodded and replied, "Give me a moment." He glared at the thugs and said firmly, "I strongly suggest you put down your weapons. Now." Suddenly, a woman in military clothes rushed into the doorway, stopping abruptly when she saw the chaos. She quickly pulled out two knives and said, "Ben, get behind me." "You're late again, Sergeant," Tatiana remarked with a smirk. Sam watched as the sergeant put away her knives, moved to the fallen goons, and tied their hands behind their backs, ignoring the ones who were no longer a threat. Sam stared at the three women and jumped when Ben touched her arm again. He pointed to Hal, and she nodded with a shy smile. "Hal, I need you to not hurt these two men," she said, and it felt strange to say. But Hal looked at her and nodded. The two men slowly knelt down and placed their knives on the floor. The sergeant quickly bound their hands and disarmed them. She looked at Hal, who raised his hands to show he was no longer a threat. Sam rushed over and hugged Hal tightly. He embraced her back, his body shaking with adrenaline. They shared a brief kiss, and she held him even tighter. "Can someone explain what's happening here?" the sergeant asked. "Ben came to save the damsel in distress again. This time I believe he saved these men from Hal," Tatiana said with a hint of annoyance. Ben frowned at her. "It seems you two have a history?" "He killed a man the colonel asked me to protect," Tatiana said angrily, clearly hurt. She glared at Hal. "I thought I had finished you off." Hal held up his hand, showing a scar, and placed it over his heart. "Almost." Sam's eyes widened as she realized Tatiana was responsible for Hal's injury. Hal turned to Ben. "I need to make a call. I'm Hal Demon, by the way." Ben smiled and replied, "I'm Ben Shepard." Hal took out his phone and dialed his contact. "Report," came the voice. "I'm in Vegas. I found another group from the same source as before." The person on the other end swore, prompting Hal to continue after confirming that all the men were secured and none were a threat. "I figured out why they are after Sam. The information they want is important. It needs to go to the FBI right away." Sam stared at Hal in disbelief. He nodded at her and offered a reassuring smile. There was a pause, and then the voice on the line responded with more enthusiasm. "Really? That's great! Which hotel are you staying at? I will have someone from the agency pick up the information." "The Enchant Resort. They need to act fast since this information is urgent," Hal said. "Got it. What do you need right away?" Hal glanced at the situation around him. Two people were gone, and he felt a strange satisfaction about that. "I need help with the police." "No, we will take care of this," the sergeant replied. "Who is that?" Carl asked. "Put her on the phone." Hal raised his eyebrows and handed his phone to the woman. She had a brief conversation with Carl, then returned the phone, looking at Hal carefully. He frowned at her and put the phone to his ear. "It's me. They'll handle the cleanup. I will send the FBI for the details right away." The call ended, so Hal put his phone back in his pocket and turned to Ben. "Thank you for your help." "Those guys didn't look like federal agents or police. Who were they?" Ben asked. Hal signaled for Sam to join him again, and she quickly came to his side. "Sam used to live with a dangerous man. He runs a club up in Rochester, New York, but he is also involved in a troubling situation. He made a note about a delivery arriving in New York City on a ship. It is on a quiet route and will arrive in 2 days." Soon after he wrote the note, Sam escaped from the bad relationship. She accidentally took the note and used it as a bookmark. She has been on the run, and this man who has a poor memory is trying to get the information back. He can't reach the ship, so all he has is the note, which I now hold. The big man nodded and then looked closer at Hal's arm. "Looks like your jacket got damaged." Hal looked at his sleeve and sighed. "That was a new jacket," he said, then turned to Sam. "Still hungry?" She smiled shyly and nodded. Hal turned to Ben. "Can I treat you and your friends to dinner?" He glanced at Tatiana. "As long as you promise not to try to hurt me again." She made a sound, but got a serious look from Ben and finally agreed with a nod. Ben smiled back. "We have a reservation, but we would love your company if you want to join us." Hal noticed the sergeant was trying to get Ben's attention. "I'll handle things with the authorities and see you upstairs later," she said as the police entered the corridor. She walked over to speak with them. They introduced themselves as they waited for directions from the police captain. Finally, Hal and Sam followed Ben and his bodyguards, Lilia and Tatiana, to a nice restaurant that had a beautiful waterfall. Hal smiled as he noticed how nervous Sam seemed next to the two women. He kissed her hand and looked into her eyes, making her giggle nervously while the others watched with interest. As the waiter brought the menus, Hal's phone rang. He excused himself and stepped outside to answer. "Hello? Hal Demon?" "Yes. Who is this?" he asked, frowning. "This is Agent Patterson from the FBI. I was told you have something for me. I'm at the front desk." Hal blinked. He hadn't expected someone so soon. "I'll be there in a minute." He walked to the front desk and quickly noticed the agent, who looked him over as he approached. "Agent Patterson," he said. "Hal Demon?" she confirmed, and he nodded. He handed her a piece of paper. "This is a note Frank Capello wrote and left at his home. The woman I'm with, Sam Dulane, lived with him, and he was not kind to her. She managed to escape and took this note as a bookmark for a book she's reading. Mr. Capello has been looking for her ever since. He has tried to find her twice this week. I believe he might not remember what the note says. I found it tonight, and it seems to say something will happen in 2 days." As she read the note, Agent Patterson nodded, realizing they needed to act quickly. She carefully placed the paper in her pocket. "Thank you. Can I reach you and Miss Dulane at your number?" she asked. "Yes, she's staying with me," he replied. The agent smiled. "Thank you. I will contact you soon." With that, she hurried away. Hal watched her leave and returned to the restaurant. He saw Sam waiting for him, and her relieved expression made him wish he had explained things to her earlier. He promised himself to keep her better informed in the future. He paused, thinking about their future together. The idea of having a future with Sam felt like a cherished promise. He joined her and kissed her forehead. Her face lit up with a shy yet happy smile that he loved to see. He sat down and told the table about what had just happened. Sam's smile grew bigger as she realized that one of her choices would help save 30 young women from being taken into New York Harbor. "Are you here to enjoy the sights or gambling?" Hal asked Ben. Ben shook his head. "The ladies don't like me walking around crowded places. I get too much attention. I'm not into gambling either. I'm here for the International Conference on Science, Engineering, and Technology." Hal raised his eyebrows. "Is that what all these people are here for?" Ben grinned and nodded. "I just got here this morning. The conference is only today and tomorrow. I have some meetings coming up, and there are a few discussions I really want to join," Ben said, glancing at his bodyguards who didn't seem pleased. "I told you two that you don't need to come with us to the meetings. Evelyn and I will be okay. You know we can't leave you unguarded, Ben. Lilia replied. There are military officials from many countries at this conference. Hal looked back at Ben and noticed he seemed a bit defeated. The big man forced a smile for Hal and Sam. It was more fun when I didn't have so much attention. Make the most of it, Hal advised with a nod. Ben nodded back thoughtfully and smiled again. What brings you two to Vegas? He asked. Sam glanced at Hal with a hint of worry, and he held her hand. I'm heading to Los Angeles tomorrow. I have some things to take care of there. Tatiana stared at him intently. Is this thing going to cause trouble? Ben frowned at her, and she tried not to show she noticed. Hal observed them and wondered about their relationship. There seemed to be a lot of pressure between them, but he didn't know why. No, that's not the plan, Hal reassured her. Tatiana nodded, briefly looking at Ben before looking away, accepting his answer. What about you, Sam? Ben asked. Sam seemed a bit nervous being around everyone. Her gaze shifted from Hal to Ben. I'm staying. I'll wait here for Hal. The hotel has a pool, so I might go there, maybe. She smiled at everyone, and Hal felt her grip on his hand tighten. He gently squeezed her hand back, and she smiled at him, grateful for his support. Ben looked at Hal. Is Sam going to have any trouble with those people? Hal started to say no, but then he paused. The FBI had the information now, but wouldn't reveal it until they made their move in 2 days. Oh, no. He turned to Sam, who was watching him closely, concerned. He felt stuck between two bad choices. He couldn't take her with him because Lisa and Chet were dangers she shouldn't face. Leaving her here alone wasn't safe either, especially since Frank might find out she wasn't supposed to be in the loop anymore. Frank had connections in this city, and they could locate her quickly. Now, wandering around Las Vegas tonight did not seem wise. He had to deal with Frank Capello soon. How long will you be in Los Angeles? Ben asked. I won't be back until after midnight tomorrow, Hal replied carefully. Ben exchanged looks with Lilia and Tatiana before looking back at Hal. Sam can come with us. She would be safe there. Hal watched the two women as they considered his options, then turned to Sam. Is that all right with you? I'd prefer to be with you, she started. It's too risky. So you were not honest? Tatiana said, suddenly upset. Enough, Ben warned the woman, whose eyes darted to him. Hal was taken aback by the mix of emotions on her face. Frustration, confusion, and fear all played out clearly. Usually he found it hard to read people's feelings, but Sam was an exception. Tatiana was skilled in hiding her true self, but when she was with Ben, her mask slipped, showing her real emotions just like Sam did. Hal noted this and turned back to Sam's worries. He took a deep breath and held Sam's hands in his. My wife will be there. I don't know how she will react when I tell her I'm leaving, but I'm sure it won't be good for you, and she might become aggressive. She doesn't handle losing well. More concerning is Chet Barley. He's having an affair with Lisa, and I suspect he's using her to get to me. I've heard he's gone off track. Ben listened, clearly worried. How are you getting to Los Angeles? Hal looked at him. I'm driving. I don't like to fly. Being in a packed plane with strangers isn't for me. I was going to offer you a jet service I use. You'd fly alone, and it would shorten the journey to just an hour, Ben suggested. Hal was surprised. I can't afford that. It's on me, Ben insisted. Hal raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's very kind of you. Why? Ben nodded towards Sam, who looked at Hal with concern. You need to be well rested for your trip. Please accept Ben's offer, she urged. Seeing the worry on her face made him uncomfortable. He turned to Ben. Thank you. I'll accept. Ben smiled in relief. When do you need to be in Los Angeles, and when will you come back? Arriving by noon would be best. I'll return here around 9? Ben nodded and spoke softly into his phone. After a moment, he turned back with a grin. All set. They will meet you at the charter counter. Sky Shepherd. You own the jet service? Hal asked, surprised. Ben shook his head. No, it's just a way to attract clients using my name. Dinner was served, and the talk shifted to lighter topics like travel, music, and Hal bragging about Sam's singing, which brought smiles and laughter from her. When Sam asked Ben about being famous, he admitted he found it difficult and mostly tried to ignore it. His passion was engineering, and he enjoyed solving puzzles. They changed the topic away from Hal's real job. Just before dessert, another couple joined them. The man, Dan Bishop, was a former military member, and like Ben, he was very interested in engineering. He was also at the conference. His wife, Willow, was very beautiful, and Hal quickly noticed she was similar to Sam. She had probably faced unwanted attention throughout her life, too. He felt a thought creeping in and tried to push it away with a small frown. He noticed Dan watching him and gave a slight nod while holding Sam's hand. Dan was clearly protective of Willow, but he acknowledged Hal's gesture as a sign of friendship. After dinner, Ben convinced Evelyn to come down and join them. They didn't drink anything stronger than coffee, tea, or spring water, but they found a small bar where people could sing on stage like a karaoke show. After some encouragement, they got Sam to go up and sing for them. She started a bit nervously, but soon found her rhythm and ended with a powerful performance, bringing the audience to their feet. They kept her on stage for one more song, and when she returned to their table, she hugged Hal joyfully. "I think you found your talent," Ben told Sam with a big smile. "She loves to sing, and she's amazing," Hal said proudly, receiving a hug and a kiss on the cheek from her. As the hour grew late, they all parted ways with plans to meet for breakfast the next morning. Willow and Sam hugged, feeling a strong connection after their brief time together. Hal let Sam into their room, and she immediately went to the window to take in the view. "Thank you so much for bringing me here, Hal," she sighed while gazing at the lights below. "When I get home, I need to thank Eve for making me give you a ride to Erie," Hal chuckled. Sam turned to him, looking a little sad. "Can we not talk about going home? That place never made me feel as happy as this does." He nodded. "I'm sorry. I didn't think about that. You're right. Aside from that brief moment when we faced some trouble, being here has been really great." Sam laughed softly at his attempt to cheer her up. She stepped closer and put her hands on his shoulders, resting against him. He looked down, then raised an eyebrow at her, which made her laugh again. She pressed a little harder. "I want to show you how much I appreciate you keeping me safe from the bad guys," she said with a cute pout. "I want that too, but it has to wait until tomorrow night," he replied with a sigh. "Can I kiss you?" He leaned forward, and their lips met in a soft kiss. He lost himself in the moment. When she pulled back, she saw his dreamy expression and smiled happily, knowing he felt as good as she did. Hal felt a rush of pleasure, but knew he had to stop before it got too intense. He wanted to face Lisa tomorrow, hoping he hadn't crossed any major boundaries. He had kissed Sam, and those kisses were meaningful. But then, his thoughts turned to Lisa's past interactions with other men, and he felt a mix of jealousy and hurt. He knew Lisa seemed to push him, trying to provoke a reaction he struggled to control. Her need to have power over him felt overwhelming. He didn't want to feel that way anymore, but he also longed for some happiness in his life. Now that he had felt it, he wanted more. Gentle hands touched his face, and he was surprised to find wetness there. Was he crying? When he looked, he met Sam's kind eyes. "There you are. You seemed lost in thought. Were those sad thoughts?" she asked. He loved the feel of her hands on his face. "No, these are tears of happiness. Finally, I feel happy after so long." She made a soft sound, and then her lips were on his again. He kissed her gently, savoring the moment. When they pulled apart, he wrapped his arms around her. When he let her go, she smiled at him, her cheeks glowing. He led her to the bathroom, and they brushed their teeth together. After that, he changed into his shorts while she continued getting ready. He promised to help her with her hair in the morning. He glanced at the large bed in the room and noticed that the sofa could open up into a bed too. He tried it out and found it to be quite comfortable. As he started to put away his clothes, Sam came out of the bathroom. "Could you stay with me until I fall asleep?" she asked. Hal saw she was wearing his blackish shirt again. He glanced at his laundry and she smiled back at him. He let out a little laugh. She noticed the sofa bed was open and looked at him with hope. "Just for a little bit?" He smiled and nodded, making her face light up with happiness. She hurried to the bed and got under the covers. He lay on top while she cuddled up against his side, resting her arm on his chest. He felt a sense of calm wash over him as he ran his fingers through her hair, and she smiled contentedly. Feeling relaxed, he reached over to turn off the light, leaving a soft glow from the bathroom. He settled closer to her. This was contentment. Hal enjoyed it and wanted more moments like this. In the soft light from the next room, he saw Sam looking at him. She smiled, and warmth spread through his chest. He was amazed that her feelings were so clear to him. Normally, he missed small signs, but her emotions were easy to read. Her eyes sparkled with happiness just being near him. For the first time, he felt that he didn't have to prove anything for her to want him. She accepted him without judging the past he carried. She was snug against him, and he could sense her excitement. It felt right to lean closer and share a gentle kiss before resting. Their eyes met, and he saw hope in hers. When he kissed her softly, she responded with eagerness, and he felt their connection deepen. He kissed her back, feeling a desire to be close to her. Hal wanted to hold her tighter and found himself getting tangled in the blankets. After a moment, he jumped off the bed to straighten things out and then covered her with his body again. She wrapped her arms and legs around him, making a soft sound of contentment. They fit together perfectly, and both enjoyed the closeness. Sam's hands moved to his back, and she felt some scars there. She paused and looked into his eyes. "Does it hurt when I touch you?" she asked gently. Seeing her worry, he shook his head. Then he wondered if the scars bothered her. Instead of answering, she kissed him again and slid her hands playfully along his back. After a moment, she pulled back, surprised. "Oh my goodness, Hal!" Hal smiled as Sam's laughter filled the room. They enjoyed these moments of simple closeness, laughing and sharing warmth that was comforting and joyful. They held each other tightly, wrapped up in the connection they shared. Hal looked at Sam and appreciated the joy she brought into his life, her laughter and energy lifting his spirits. They talked softly, sharing memories and stories, with Sam resting her head on his shoulder as they continued to relax together. The comfort between them felt natural, a calm yet powerful bond that required no words. In those quiet moments, Hal felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time, and he knew Sam felt the same. As they lay close, their connection deepened, not through words but through shared comfort and gentle embraces. Moments like these reminded Hal of the strength and trust that had grown between them, giving him a renewed sense of belonging. The evening passed in this calm, easy silence, both of them content, feeling more understood and connected than ever before. They drifted into sleep side by side as the night settled around them, peaceful and steady. It felt great for him, but Sam was starting to struggle to respond. Since she wasn't pushing him away, he picked up the pace and each moment felt even better. "Sam, you feel amazing!" he said between breaths. She seemed unable to speak and just held on to him tightly. He thought she was getting closer to something special, shaking slightly with each movement. He felt himself nearing his limit. She was holding him tighter, and he was moving faster. "Sam, I'm almost there. What about you?" "Now, do it," she called out, surprising him with her loudness. Her words gave him the push he needed, and he moved faster until everything around them seemed to fade away. "Oh, wow, Sam!" he exclaimed as he felt a wave of warmth pass through him. She pressed her lips to his neck and trembled quietly. They held each other, sharing their happiness and the closeness they felt. Hal had never felt anything so deeply before. When they finally calmed down, Hal softly kissed Sam's cheeks, her nose, and her forehead. She looked up at him with a blissful smile. "What was that for?" she asked softly. Hal struggled to find the right words to explain what he felt. It was something completely new to him. He just smiled and shook his head. She laughed lightly and let her legs slide off his hips and onto the bed. That sent shivers of joy through both of them. They exclaimed softly from the intensity. "No more, I'm done for tonight. That was too good," she pleaded gently. He chuckled softly, then carefully moved away from Sam, who took a sharp breath and relaxed. He shifted to the bed next to her, admiring her sweet face. To be honest, he noticed everything about her for a moment. Eventually, he heard her breathing slow down. He rose from the bed and tucked the sheets around her. Not ready to leave, he laid down beside her to watch her drift off to sleep. Now that he could think clearly, he felt guilty. He had crossed a line while still married. Could he really say he was better than his ex-wife? He thought about it for a while until he realized one key difference. It was important. He shared a deep bond with Sam, while his ex, Lisa, saw men only as tools for her own needs. They meant nothing to her, but then again, he meant nothing to her too. Hal sat in a cozy chair in the lobby of the hotel where Lisa was staying, just up the street from the Los Angeles Convention Center. It was a very comfortable spot, and he didn't feel like moving from it. He felt utterly exhausted. After arriving hours ago, he had checked the neighborhood, scouting any potential places where Chet might be hiding, but found no signs of him. He hadn't expected to see any, though. Next, he slipped into Lisa's room, inspecting it carefully for any clues that Chet had been there. There was nothing. Returning outside, he picked a spot to observe from. Eventually, he saw Lisa coming back from the convention center. She was dressed in a stylish red and blue dress that ended just above her knees, her high heels adding an elegant touch. There was a spring in her step as she neared the hotel, a smile playing on her face, as though she sensed he might be watching. Perhaps she did. After all, Chet had given him the exact time and date, and Lisa. His mind drifted back to the moment he'd first questioned her about Chet. She had even left a note about her hotel in plain view, almost as if she'd intended for him to find it. Looking back now, he saw it clearly, her pattern of setting him up, manipulating his emotions, preparing him for yet another confrontation. She must have known he would come to Los Angeles. It was a little after 5 p.m. when she entered the hotel. He fought the urge to follow her immediately. He reminded himself that he wasn't here for a confrontation that was not the plan. Thinking of Sam brought him a sense of calm. He remembered the morning with her, how he'd awoken feeling peaceful, her gentle breathing close. He'd slept soundly in her arms, something he hadn't done in years without feeling anxious or reactive. This moment of closeness felt like a risk that, at least this time, had worked. They had shared breakfast with friends, and Sam had kissed him goodbye before he left for the airport. There was hope in her eyes as she said goodbye, and he carried that with him. After letting Lisa pass by and enter the hotel, he waited in the lobby, keeping an eye out for any sign of Chet. The clock struck 6 p.m., and still, there was no sign of him. At 6:15, he took the elevator up to her floor, slipping quietly into her room. The moment he entered, he was hit by the sharp smell of blood. He moved cautiously, gun in hand, until he saw the bed. It was clear Chet had already been here. Lisa lay still, her face pale. The scene before him was hard to process, a grim reminder of violence. Hal's mind recoiled, and the calm mask he wore settled in place as he took in the scene, his thoughts steadying as he noted the details before him. The scene was chaotic, with blood marking the sheets, carpet, walls, and even the ceiling. The intensity of the attack made it clear that Chet had acted in a blind rage, a contrast to Hal's controlled approach. Then he heard noises from the next room, a series of loud thumps, followed by drawers slamming shut. Someone was venting their anger. Realization dawned on Hal. Chet wasn't absent. He was already here, in the next room. Hal knelt beside his wife, gently closing her eyes. "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you needed, Lisa," he whispered softly. He stood and let his focus shift, releasing his inner resolve. He took in the scent of the room, his senses alert as he moved to leave. Noticing the connecting door between the rooms, he thought it might be unlocked. Quietly, he slid the door open and stepped into the next room, glancing left. Chet reacted with startling speed, lifting a weapon and firing as Hal managed 2 quick shots of his own. The impact hit Hal hard, pushing him down the hallway until he struck the door and his gun fell from his hand. Gasping for breath, he slumped to the floor, struggling to pull in air. He couldn't see Chet, who had dropped behind the bed, but he could hear him. "Damn, old man, you're pretty quick for your age." Hal tried to catch his breath, managing to ask, "Lisa?" Yeah, Chet muttered. "Didn't mean for it to get that far, but she really got on my nerves." "Why?" Hal rasped, barely able to speak. Chet scoffed. "Can't figure it out? How'd you end up on top anyway? She was just bait, but you were late. She started freaking out. Guess she thought she had you wrapped around her finger." Hal's breathing steadied slightly, enough for him to press on, though his patience was wearing thin. "Why all this?" he asked between breaths. "Why? It's simple," Chet sneered. "I broke into the records office to see the agent rankings. Turns out I'm rated above everyone except you, and I don't settle for number 2. Chet emerged, though stumbling, holding his gun with a strained grip, his left shoulder injured and his face marked by a deep graze. Grimacing, he braced himself against the TV stand, his glare fixed on Hal, ready to finish what he had started. It threw him off balance. He smiled widely when he saw Hal leaning against the door. Hal's arms were at his sides, hands on the floor, and his gun was out of reach. He chuckled softly to himself. Chet moved a bit unsteadily toward Hal. He tried to aim his gun at Hal's head, but his arm shook as he pulled the trigger. A piece of the door exploded near Hal, who quickly leaned to one side. Hal then raised his other arm with a second gun and shot Chet in the knees. Chet fell forward with a loud shout. Hal quickly used his knife on Chet, watching surprise spread across the younger man's face. Chet struggled to fight back, but Hal took the gun from him. Hal finally took a deep breath but felt sharp pain in his chest. He likely had some broken ribs. He pushed Chet's body aside and looked down at him. He felt a dark urge rise within him. He locked eyes with Chet and pulled his knife to finish the job. Hal felt a sense of relief as fear vanished from Chet's eyes. He wiped the knife clean on Chet's shirt. Carefully getting to his feet, he pulled out his phone and called his contact. "Report." "I found Chet," Hal said, breathing heavily. "He's dead," the man replied. It was more of a statement than a question. "He killed Lisa when I didn't arrive on time. When I got there, he attacked me," Hal explained. There was a moment of silence. "Why weren't you on time? You've always been punctual before." The man sounded a bit worried. He didn't like changes in Hal's behavior. "I was on time, just not when she expected. I didn't come to confront her. I was there to tell her I wanted a divorce. I didn't think he would hurt her. She was just a way to get to me. He wasn't like me." Hal felt dizzy and struggled to catch his breath. He mentioned the hotel name, the floor, and the room numbers, then hung up. He moved down the hall and picked up his other gun. He reloaded both guns and tucked them into hidden pockets in his pants. Then he checked Chet's luggage and grabbed a shirt and hoodie. He took off his torn shirt and the 2 vests he had been wearing. Though they had kept him safe, he still felt bruised. The shirt was a bit large on him, and the hoodie was bulky, but at least he was no longer covered in blood. He left the room and headed for the lobby. As he rode the elevator down, he struggled to breathe more and more. He was in trouble. As he walked through the lobby, his mind was filled with the bright smile of a lovely woman. He wished he could see that smile just one more time. That's when his handler found him, sitting in a soft chair, struggling to breathe. Sam hurried through the hospital halls. She felt very anxious. She could only focus on what was ahead of her, and all she could hear was the loud thump of her heart. When Hal missed his flight, the pilot called Ben to ask if he should wait. That started a flurry of activity. Hal had been shot. That was all Sergeant Kilcade could get out of Hal's close friend. When she heard the news, the sergeant called in resources to find out which hospital Hal had been taken to. They said their goodbyes to Dan and Willow, and then Ben arranged a private jet to take them from Las Vegas to Los Angeles. She was amazed at his kindness, but his 2 bodyguards told her that Ben promised to take care of her until Hal was back. He was serious about keeping his promises. They had a police escort to the hospital, which Ben also couldn't explain, but she was thankful. They met the friend on the phone named Carl, who told them Hal was still in surgery. Hal had been wearing a vest, so the bullet hadn't gone through, but it was a big gun. It broke some ribs, and pieces punctured his lungs. His condition was critical. That morning, she woke up in the waiting room leaning against Ben's shoulder. He gently woke her to say someone had finally come to tell them Hal was moved to a recovery room during the night. He gave her the room number and floor, and she hurried to find him. When she reached the room, she rushed inside and saw Hal resting against some pillows. She stopped herself from throwing her arms around him, and instead moved next to the bed, brushing his hair back from his face. He had a tube providing air to him. Her touch must have stirred him, as his eyes slowly opened. She remembered his rule. "Hal, it's Sam. How are you feeling?" "I've felt better." He took a breath. "I've felt worse." His eyes scanned the room. "Where am I?" "A hospital in Los Angeles. Can you tell me what happened?" she asked. He closed his eyes for a moment. "I probably shouldn't." Then he opened his eyes. "I guess I can say a little. The man my wife chose to be with hurt her. He's the one who shot me." Sam covered her mouth in shock. A mix of horror and relief washed over her. Then she felt bad for feeling relieved. It must have shown on her face as he gave her a gentle smile. Yes, it's okay, I totally get it. I went to tell Lisa I wanted to end our marriage, but that's not going to happen now. I'm free, even if it feels strange to say that. I'm sad she's gone, and I feel awful about how it happened, but it was out of my hands. Realizing this makes me see my entire marriage in a new light. She didn't love me. She loved the way she could control me and the chaos inside my mind. She wanted to be in charge of that. I'm sorry, Sam said softly. He shook his head a bit. You've been honest with me, and that means a lot. I keep so many secrets to protect others. But you bring me happiness. I never thought I could feel this way. I don't deserve it, but I value it, and you. Sam's eyes were shining with unshed tears. Those aren't sad tears, right? He asked with concern. No, you silly man. I'm just so happy, too, she exclaimed. Then why aren't you kissing me? She laughed and leaned in to kiss him, gently holding his face. In the hallway, Ben peeked in once, and then looked away. He noticed the small man beside him. He met his eyes. You're taking over their protection duty until things settle with her ex, right? Carl nodded. Good. I need to say my goodbyes. He knocked on the doorframe and entered with a smile. Hi, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm heading back to my own life, and I wanted to wish you goodbye and good luck, he said with a smile. Sam turned and hugged him tightly, which he returned. Then he shook Hal's hand. You two take care of yourselves and each other, okay? Thank you for keeping Sam safe, Hal said. Ben smiled. It was my pleasure. Get well soon. With a final wave, the big man left to join his trio of ladies in the hallway before heading home. Carl came in, frowning at the man in the bed. You gave us quite a scare. Hal shrugged, a little smile forming. The doctor says you can leave in a week. You've had enough travel. We'll fly you back to Rochester. I'm not going back. Chet was based on the West Coast, right? San Diego? I want his area. I need a new home for Sam and me. Sam squeaked with excitement, looking between the two men. Carl sighed, but knew he had to keep their best asset happy, especially since he had just dealt with their next best agent. He had also managed to find and deal with Hal due to some weaknesses in their security. Carl nodded, letting Sam celebrate and cheer, even as he tried to maintain his own composure. He struggled to keep his dignity as he nodded to the couple. I'll start making arrangements. Once Sam and Hal were alone again, he gave her a serious look. I hope I wasn't overstepping when I suggested you'd... No! Of course I want to be with you, she replied eagerly. He took a deep breath, needing to be clear. My other side is here to stay. I can't ignore that. We're meant to be together, he said, a bit unsure. I get it. I can't promise I'll fully accept that part of you, but I love you and want to be with you forever, Sam replied gently. He smiled, feeling a wave of relief and happiness. Such a wonderful feeling. He treasured every moment. He planned to ask this woman to marry him and to make it right this time. This new life together would be grounded in love, not control. I love you too. Hal watched Sam's bright smile light up her face, and he felt the true joy fill his heart again. He would do anything to keep that smile there. That was his new mission. Frank Capello checked into his hotel room in Positano, Italy. He was a big man, but getting here had worn him out. He tossed his suitcase onto the bed. Everything he owned was in that one small case. Weary, he walked to the double doors leading to the balcony and leaned on the railing, taking in the beauty of the village below. A gentle breeze cooled his face. His mind was still reeling from how fast his situation had turned. Just 6 weeks ago, he was a top figure in a shady business in the U.S. and Mexico. Now, he had little more than the cash in his suitcase. $1.5 million was not enough to restart his old operation. He blamed it all on that person from back home. He had to rely on many contacts to get away from the trouble his business had landed him in. When the authorities stopped the ship he used and rescued the people he was meant to work with, they began looking for him. He had no choice but to leave everything and flee the country. Now, he would have to start fresh. He still had a few old contacts who wouldn't try to harm him, so once he set up a new operation with their help, he could begin earning money again. Once he was stable, he would deal with unfinished matters back home. A satisfied smile crept across his face. Suddenly he felt someone behind him, and before he could turn, he felt a sharp pressure against his neck. He froze. The sensation was intense, and he tried to lean forward to ease it, but the pressure followed. He had to stop before he lost his balance. The pain lingered, and he clenched his teeth. "What do you want?" Frank asked nervously, trying to keep his balance. He thought about who could have reached him so fast. He was sure he had planned his escape perfectly. The man behind him was clearly very skilled. "What do I want?" Frank felt a rush of fear as the voice spoke softly but with a chilling tone. "Nothing." Frank started to feel anxious. He looked down and saw the drop beneath him was dangerous if the knife didn't take him out first. "Look, you can have the money in the suitcase. Just don't hurt me." He gasped in fear as the knife pressed harder. "He said I could have you for Sam." Frank's heart raced. Sam? She had sent this man after him? His mind raced with memories of all the times he was unkind to Sam, and the thought of losing control made him feel weak. A quick thrust of the knife struck him, causing his muscles to go limp. Frank couldn't scream as he fell over the railing, tumbling headfirst toward the ground below. A passing bus rolled over the spot where he fell, ending it all. When the tourist group from China jumped out of the bus, some started taking pictures. A few raised their cameras toward the open balcony, but there was nothing to see except curtains gently moving in the wind. Inside, the room was quiet and empty except for an open suitcase on the bed filled with odd items that would catch the police's attention. Sam felt alive and full of energy. She had just spent a day at a luxurious spa, enjoying every moment. She had a full-body massage that relaxed her completely. After that, she had a facial treatment that made her skin feel refreshed. Her nails were done beautifully, painted in a lovely soft pink with a touch of sparkle. Next, they trimmed her hair just a little bit because Hal loved it long. As a special treat, she had a grooming session to pamper herself. It was the kind of experience she had always dreamt of but never thought she would actually get. And to have it all happen in a beautiful spa in Positano, Italy, was beyond what she expected. With Italy being her first stamp in her new passport, it was turning out to be a wonderful trip. Sam had been there for Hal as he recovered from his injuries back in Los Angeles. He healed quickly, and they had a nice time resting at a hotel while Hal's friend, Carl, arranged their new home and life on the West Coast. Then Hal surprised her with a passport that Carl had set up and first-class tickets to Naples, Italy. Hal was eager to get to their destination. They drove straight to the lovely cliffside village of Positano and checked into a beautiful hotel. After enjoying a magical dinner on a patio with a view of the Mediterranean, they fell onto their bed, too tired for anything but holding each other close. Her head was spinning from how fast everything had happened. He promised they would take it slow the next day. The next morning, he surprised her with a spa appointment just for her, saying he was not comfortable with strangers. She had such a wonderful day and couldn't wait to get back to their room to see Hal. Thinking about him made her feel all warm inside. Hal was such a breath of fresh air compared to her old boyfriend, Frank. Just thinking about Frank made her uneasy, so she pushed those thoughts away and focused on Hal. He made her feel good, and she loved that. Sam hurried down the hallway to their suite and used her key card to enter. She walked into the open space and saw Hal relaxing on a lounge chair on their balcony. When he turned and smiled at her, she felt a flutter inside. "Hello, beautiful," he said with a grin. She jumped into his strong arms and kissed him. When they finally pulled apart, he smiled and had her sit on the edge of the chair next to him. "Did you enjoy your day at the spa?" he asked. "It was so relaxing, I loved every moment," she replied, her voice full of happiness. "Good. You deserve to be spoiled," he said, lifting her hand to kiss it gently. "Very pretty." "Thank you," she exclaimed. He studied her fingers more closely, and his expression changed a bit, as if something was on his mind. Sam watched him, feeling concerned. "It's almost perfect, but there's one thing missing," he said with a playful sigh. She pondered what he meant, wanting to be just right for him. "Ah, I know!" he exclaimed with excitement. Still holding her hand, he turned to reach under the pillow behind him. When he turned back, he slid off the lounge chair and knelt before her. In his left hand was a small black box. Sam felt a little dizzy as she watched him open it, revealing the most beautiful ring she had ever seen. It had a large, sparkling diamond in the center, with smaller diamonds on either side, looking like a swirling galaxy. She couldn't catch her breath. It was just so lovely. That center diamond was enormous. "I need you, Sam. I can't imagine my life without you. You bring meaning and balance to my days, and I promise to do my best to keep you happy and safe as we grow old together. Will you marry me?" Sam was speechless as she saw the hope and affection in Hal's eyes. She quickly nodded, and a big, relieved smile broke across his face. He took the ring from the box and gently placed it on her shaking ring finger, which, amusingly, was the only one not wearing a ring. It fit perfectly. "Oh my gosh, Hal!" she exclaimed, staring at the beautiful diamonds now on her finger. She had never owned a diamond before. Her whole body was trembling, so he moved to sit beside her again and pulled her into a comforting hug. "I love you so much," she said, tears of joy filling her eyes. "I love you too," he replied warmly. After a moment, she rested her head against his and gazed in amazement at the ring. "When did you have time to get this?" she asked, surprised. He shrugged softly. "While you were at the spa, I went for a walk and did some shopping." She couldn't believe the size of the main stone. Is it real?" Hal chuckled softly. "Yes, they're all real, and the center one is 10 carats. I wouldn't spend that much money on a fake ring." Sam gasped when she heard the price and pulled back to look at him, stunned. Hal quickly felt embarrassed. "Sorry, that was a bit much. I shouldn't have mentioned the price." She still looked shocked. "Hal, you shouldn't spend that much on me." "Don't worry about it. Of course I should. Didn't you hear me say how much I need and love you? You mean more to me than money. I understand if you don't like the design. I just asked the store to show me their prettiest ring." He looked down at her hand, admiring the ring. "I think it looks perfect on you." Sam pulled his face closer to hers and kissed him again and again, smiling with tears in her eyes when she pulled back. She then took off the costume jewelry on either side of her new ring, keeping her favorite rings on her index finger and thumb for some space. Looking up at Hal, she said, "The new ring needed a little room. The others were too crowded." "Maybe we could find matching earrings?" Hal suggested, grinning as her eyes lit up. She shook her head. "Wait! I can't let you spend your savings on me like this." He smiled and shook his head. "I'm not using my savings. I recently received some money that I can spend differently. Now it can be used for good things, like making you happy. I really want to see you smile." She playfully pushed him back onto the lounge chair and stretched over him. "You silly man. You don't need to spend money to make me happy. There are many other ways you can do that," she said with a teasing grin. She noticed his eyes looking a little dazed with interest. She felt excited about how happy he was making her. Sam was also looking forward to bringing him joy in their future together. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.